If you carry a firearm and discharge your weapon in self-defense, you could face hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees and expenses. So carry the protection of CCW Safe, Self-Defense Legal Services membership. Upfront payment of all criminal and civil defense costs with no out-of-pocket for members. Unlimited defense budgets, unmatched legal expertise. Carry the same level of support police officers have. Carry CCW Safe, the highest caliber.
And we're back, and I'm joined by my co-host, John Wheaton. Good to see you, John.
How's it going, guys?
And we have 4 amazing military women with us tonight, and I don't want to do any injustice to any of you, so I'm going to have each of you introduce yourselves to the Survival Dispatch News audience. We'll start with you, Jess, and we'll just go clockwise around the board.
Thank you, Chris and John. Excited to be here with all of these ladies. And I am a Marine Corps veteran. I served as a combat correspondent for 8 years, originally in Quantico at the Marine Corps Recruiting Command, and then some time over in Iwakuni as an operations chief covering Pacific Theater operations for the Public Affairs Office, and then finalized my term with Recruiting Station Orange County, where I was the marketing director and an event planner for that AO. So I got out of the Marine Corps in November of 2020 and pursued the life of travel, recreation, the outdoors, where I built a small business, utilizing it as a medicinal outlet for our military population and taking what I've learned very much so from my time in the Marine Corps out into the world.
That's awesome, Jess. And I'm just going to pull up your site here. Go ahead and do a shameless plug for what you offer at Lebo Risk.
Thank you. So we host adventure, wellness, and cultural immersion retreats as a for-profit, very affordable experiences that focus on the transformative side of travel, recreation, and the outdoors. We're combating 3 main things. The first is insularity within the military population and small-mindedness, essentially. Disintegration of the mind, body, and the spirit through insularity itself, and then superficiality with the tourism industry. Ultimately, it's a very over commercialized industry, and a lot of people just run in and out with their selfies, and they're not getting the depth that they need to form a broader perspective of humanity to elevate how they see the world. And ultimately, when you travel, you realize that your problems aren't that problematic. So it's a whole shift in the paradigm for the military population with this outlet. So it's been great work.
That's absolutely amazing, Jess. John, if you haven't noticed already, we're intellectually outpowered tonight. So I got your back.
I'm just going to get my mouth shut and let these ladies talk.
Teresa, good to see you. Glad to have you back on the show again. I'll let you introduce yourself again, please.
It's good to see you too, Chris. Thank you so much for doing this podcast. As I said earlier, I believe we are making history as the first group of veteran and active duty women who are speaking up and speaking out on our support for Pete Hegseth. My name is Teresa Carpenter. I am an active duty naval officer. I have been in the United States Navy for almost 29 years this April. I started off enlisted as an aviation electrician's mate, fixing the S-3B Viking aircraft and the P-3. Then I transitioned, got picked up for an officer program as a E5, made E6 in the program, and became a surface warfare officer. Got my surface warfare officer pin on USS Russell, go DDG. I worked for the now Admiral Brad Cooper, amazing man. And then I transitioned again in 2008 to the Navy Public Affairs community, which I have done ever since. I've deployed on an amphib. I deployed on a carrier. I assessed amphibs and carriers. And then I went to a joint tour, did some combatant command work there, and then went to NATO at Allied Maritime Command. And today you'll find me working with the Navy Seabees at Naval Construction Group 2, where I will end my career here in beautiful Ocean Springs, Mississippi. And in my off time, I host the Stories of Service podcast, Ordinary People Who Do Extraordinary Work. I have 171 episodes, and I've been doing that for the last 4 years, where I profile people from all walks of life who show up in service to their respective communities with a focus on change makers and people who are not afraid to stand up, and speak truth to power.
John, could you tell that she's a PAO by chance?
Yes.
Mandy, great to see you. I really appreciate your time coming on tonight. By all means, please introduce yourself.
Sure thing. I'm so happy to be here. Thanks for having me. My name is Mandy Feint. I am an active duty Army major. I've been serving on active duty for almost 2 decades now. I'm also a proud mama of 2 and a huge patriot of this country. I am a personnelist in the military. I've served in traditional Army units, the Joint Environment and Special Operations Command, most recently in Hawaii, where I was serving as the Deputy J1 at Special Operations Command Pacific. While I was stationed there, I became one of 93,000 people, including my own small children who were 1 and 3 at the time, who were impacted by the Red Hill water crisis. And for the past 3 years, I have been one of the lead advocates for this issue, for this problem set. And I've seen firsthand the corruption that is the DOD. And I've been very disheartened by how the situation has been handled. It's been a Camp Lejeune 2.0. And so I could not be more grateful for this next administration to come on. I could not be more grateful for someone like Pete Hegseth to come on board, because I truly think it's the leadership that we need to change some of the issues that we are having in the military today.
Yeah, I really appreciate you joining us, Mandy, and kudos for having the wherewithal to stand up and say something while you're still in the military. That's not entirely common amongst many people. Amy, last but not least, thank you for joining us tonight.
Good evening, all. And I am been a big fan of Mandy and what she's been doing since day one, reading the stories, watching this very closely. So it's my honor to be with everyone here tonight, especially Jess too. We come from the same origins. I started my career as a enlisted Marine combat correspondent back in 1993. I spent 8 years on active duty, then transferred to the Marine Corps Reserve. 9/11 happened. I got mobilized, deployed many times to Afghanistan and to Iraq, and especially in 2006 to a place called Anbar Province. You've heard of Fallujah, Ramadi, those places where I spent time covering the combat operations as a photographer and videographer. Later, I ended up transferring to the Navy Reserves in a commissioning program, a direct commission officer program, which led me to several tours overseas again to Afghanistan. I'm currently assigned to Naval Special Warfare, but I did a deployment under JSOC and then the Special Operations Command Europe umbrella, deploying all over the world, covering our military operations. And when I wasn't doing that, I spent time as a reporter covering stories in the San Diego region. And so that's where I currently live, in San Diego. I wrote a book a few years ago chronicling the history of Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. It's called Heroes Live Here. And I talk about the history of the base and the legacy of the Marines who served in Iraq and Afghanistan after 9/11. And so we have 21 years of Marines deploying out of Camp Pendleton. And what I learned through my research from the book is that more Marines from Camp Pendleton died in the line of duty and killed in action from Camp Pendleton than from any other one base or station in America. And so that's been a really heavy burden and for the community of Camp Pendleton. And so I do a lot of speaking on that and the history and the legacy of the Marines in that region. And I hope to retire next year. And it's just going to be an amazing inauguration and then welcoming in the next Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth. So I've been a huge fan of Pete, and I couldn't wait to share this experience with us here today and tell people why we support Pete Hegseth for the next Secretary of Defense.
It's an absolutely amazing career, Amy. So we're just going to jump right in. I think we've got 10 or 12 kind of large bucket questions. And I'll start with you, Jess, and we'll just keep doing this clockwise around the board. And the first one is a philosophical nature. I want to know what your feelings are with regards to Pete Hegseth on the comments he made with regards to women not necessarily, in his opinion, being appropriate for combat roles.
This has been a really interesting topic to think about, because I think the first reaction as a woman is to say, yes, we can do this. And what he's bringing to question is the factor of lowered standards, how things have shifted to accommodate for women, and what the implications are for how it's impacting the lethality of the United States military. And there's nothing wrong with bringing that to question. And ultimately, one of the things that I found interesting is there were issues within the Marine Corps infantry officer training where they had swapped a portion of the test as pass or fail to an unscored exercise after they were allowing women to go through that portion in OIC, officer infantry training course. So I look at those things and I'm like, okay, well, what are we doing to accommodate for? It's not that women can't, but should. And there's nothing wrong with questioning that when it comes to the lethality of the United States military. It has to be scrutinized because what matters is our ability to be effective as a warfighting organization. So the knee kick response is like, of course we can do it, but ultimately, he's just questioning those things. He never once said that women are not allowed in the military, shouldn't be in the military, or are incapable of serving in certain capacities. That's ultimately what I think is important, is he's open-minded.
Yeah, interesting comments, Jess, for sure. Teresa, I'd like to get your take on that, as well as is there, as anybody on the panel, just think about this as we go around, that's had to maybe reconcile Pete Hegseth's statements versus your own career aspirations or experiences?
So I think that what happened is that Pete Hegseth went on the Sean Ryan show and he said a very declarative statement and just said, I'm just going to say it, something along those lines. Women should not be in combat roles. And he really meant roles. And I feel like the media took that out of context, and so did a lot of other people who wanted to hang on to this talking point that he said he didn't want women in the military. He never said that. And he also, in that same podcast, said that he has no problems with those who can pass the standards and meet the standards of that occupation, that they can be admitted into those roles. But there are some interesting questions that Jessica brings up, which is during the Marine infantry, or it wasn't the Marine infantry, it was a test for women in combat in 2015. And I researched that test, and the units that had women in those particular battalions or groups, they did perform not as well. And I wasn't there. I don't know the whole test, but I think it's okay to have those discussions about combat arms positions and about what the physicality that is needed for those positions. And if there's a physical strength factor that we have to consider in order to do certain jobs, by all means, I would like Pete Hegseth to be talking to Congress about that. I think that's an important consideration. And I think that that's getting lost in his remarks about this. But as far as, do I feel that having him as my SECDEF will limit me or have I had to reconcile? No, not at all. When I listen to him speak, or when I've seen the things that, I've read his book as well, and there's nothing in there that tells me that he doesn't have respect for women or that he doesn't believe that women should be serving in the armed forces.
Yeah, I appreciate your insight there, Teresa. I want to just briefly mention that, Jess, you brought up the word lethality. We've done a couple of videos on Pete Hegseth. We have a nonstop flow of veterans and active duty military on our channel. And that word has come up more in the past couple months than ever before for us. It's really interesting how you can put a fine point on it. Military is about lethality, and everything else really is secondary to that, right? And so, I mean, we haven't discussed this before, you and I, Jess, and you use that word, which, you know, I keep hearing it over and over and over again. Just wanted to point that out. Mandy, I'd love to hear your opinion on Pete's comments and if you think it'll have any impact on your career.
Well, I don't think it's going to have any impact on my career. I serve in a combat support role. But I will say that when I first came into the military, I did serve in a combat arms branch. I also was an ROTC instructor at a university here locally in Virginia, where my cadets, my female cadets, were part of the first class of Army women who combat arms branches, every combat arms branch was open to them. And so I've kept in touch with them, and I've served as some of their mentors. And we've talked about the challenges that they have had in both leadership positions and in coming through the ranks within combat arms branches. So I do have some background on this, but I want to say too that I think that a lot of what Pete has said has been taken out of context. I think that wholeheartedly Pete values women in the military. I think that we all have a place in the military. I think that Pete wants patriots in the military. And you heard me say, I am a huge patriot of this country. And my gender does not make me any less of a patriot. I think that, President Trump and his critical, advisors and his critical thinkers have placed a lot of faith and confidence in Pete to be our next Secretary of Defense. And I've served under Trump's administration before. I trust his judgment. I trust his military decision-making process. And I think that Pete, again, values women in the military. And I think that's all I have to say about it. It doesn't really, this is not one of the subjects that really bothers me about Pete coming into this role.
All right. Thanks, Mandy. Amy, last but not least, and actually, if you could give us your thoughts on the questions with regards to his combat or women in combat, first, then I've got a second question for you after that.
Sure. Well, I think in that podcast that he sat down for, and he mentioned that he was speaking as a private citizen. He was speaking as a reservist, National Guardsman, I think. And so he followed that sentence with women in combat, not a problem. But what I think people need to distinguish is a combat arms role job, an MOS, and also integrated into a Victor unit, into tanks, artillery, infantry. So passing a course like IOC or Ranger School is much different than being integrated and operating at a Victor unit, an infantry combat arms unit in combat. So those are two separate things. And so when people conflate the two, it gets people confused. And so just because someone has a thought, or Pete as a private citizen or National Guardsman or a TV personality says one thing, it would take an act of Congress to change anything. And so just because he may have said that, it doesn't mean anything is changing. But I'll tell you that I served in combat zone multiple times, operating on the battlefield, long before the women in combat inclusion law. So it never changed anything because, and I'll tell you, in 2006, I was working for a female Marine officer who was killed in combat. And this was long before the policy came into effect. So I don't think it changes anything. That law allows women to go to the schools and be integrated into combat arms MOSs. But across the board, I just don't think it changes anything. And so, but what we need is Pete's enthusiasm and his vision for a lethal force as we go forward in, magic numbers like 2027, and listening to some of the projections with China. And that's, things we're preparing for as a military force, and our reserve forces as well are fully integrated. And we have to be aligned if we want to execute on the various serious national security implications coming forward.
Very prescient on your part, Amy, because the next question I was going to ask is that if Pete Hegseth is confirmed, do you think his views on women in combat roles might affect women's career progression or opportunities available to them? But it sounds like you've already answered that question. Not really. Is that the gist of it?
Well, I thank you for the opportunity I don't want to speculate, but I don't think he alone, as the Secretary of the Department, has the capability of changing a law or an act such as the Women Inclusion in Combat Act that Congress passed. So I don't think that's in jeopardy. I think we're already far too down the road to change anything. At this point, women are performing, integrated into the units is taking a generation of adjustments. And now that the Marine Corps especially was the last branch to integrate boot camp, recruit training, starting together, men and women together, this could help. But again, working in the infantry, Victor units, the tanks, artillery, those combat arms MOSs will take a 25-year cycle to get integrated and adjusted to that. And I don't think anyone argues that women can't do it. Of course they can. They have the strength, the capacity, the intelligence to do these courses and then be integrated. But I think what the concern has always been, and I mean, I came in long before women were even allowed to do a lot of things. And we've always kind of gained ground, is that women are going to be just integrated, but the relationship when you're one woman integrated into an infantry battalion, those dynamics are different in combat. But I think we've moved past it, and I think Pete will come to realize that with just some education, some influence, and really getting a grasp of that. Again, he was a guardsman, not even working at the Pentagon, so he may have just not known. But I think that once he sees how women are operating and integrated and accepted and fully living up to their maximum potential in these combat arms MOSs, he might just have a change of mind.
Thanks, Amy. That raises actually more questions than what I had in the brief. So Jess, this question's not in the brief, but I'm curious to hear from all of you what policy changes you think he might adopt if he's confirmed as the SECDEF.
Are you asking me?
Yeah,
first?
we'll start.
Okay.
Sorry, Jen.
No, for sure. I have heard him speak quite often about the aspect of DEI and how the implementation of accepting persons who identify as transgender, and wanting to come in and serve in a certain capacity before or after their transition, he seems very adamant about just scrapping that totally, which I am in support of, and believe it's important to understand that having a recruiting background, we heavily scrutinize the mental and physical capabilities of applicants. And so if somebody comes in and says, well, I have a mental health issue, I have asthma, these are some serious disqualifications that already occur. And then you're accepting somebody who comes in and completely identifies as the opposite sex. And it's still up for debate on whether this is a mental health crisis or not across the country, across the globe, actually. So it doesn't strike me as anything wildly out of tune to say, hey, we really need to reassess this. And this should be actually a priority, because we're using taxpayers' money and funding to support the transitioning of service members who want to go through procedures, which, again, boils down to lethality. How is this taking away from what we do as a warfighting organization? So that seems like one of the biggest policies that he's trying to address as soon as he comes into leadership.
Yeah, it's a great answer. We've had a number of people weigh in on this, and the consensus has been that supposedly there's 15,000 people in our military that are going through this transition stuff. And we've been repeatedly told that none of them are deployable assets, which for me on the outside leads to, well, they don't seem to be contributing to that mission of lethality if you can't even deploy them. But I want to give the rest of you a chance to speculate, as you said, Amy, on the same question. So Teresa, are there any policy changes that you think Hegseth would make that are under his purview that wouldn't require congressional intervention?
I definitely do. What I really hope to see from a policy standpoint is for him to take a hard look at the due process system within the military. We have right now an inspector general system that, unfortunately, in my opinion, and in the opinion of a lot of people who've been impacted by it, sadly puts the institution above due process or the institutional objectives. And what we'd really love to see, and I know Pete is very familiar with this because his lawyer, Tim Parlatore, has dealt with this firsthand with Eddie Gallagher, with Bradley Geary. I mean, those are just two Navy SEALs, but there's also so many people. Walk the Talk Foundation is working very hard to try to clean up some of these issues. And so I don't know if that's something that's on Pete's radar, but I will tell you that if I ever get a chance to talk to him, that's something that I'm definitely going to push, because having safe working environments is so important to military service members, and they should be afforded those same due process protections that we give our civilian counterparts. Mm-hmm. And when we don't protect our service members in the same way that we're protecting the civilian community, I think something's wrong with that. So I would say that would be something I would personally hope. But to Jessica's point, one other thing that wasn't pointed out about the deployability is also the medications that people who are transgender must be on at all times. And one of the things that we always learned about being deployed in a war zone is if we can't have access to our medications, are we still deployable? So it was one of the reasons why my entire career, I avoided medical like the plague, was because I didn't want to be put on any medications that would keep me from deploying. And so it's a consideration when we're looking at the transgender issue. It's not that we don't respect people who make that decision. It's really like what Jess said, it's a lethality issue. So I do hope that he looks at that and takes some steps to address it.
A great answer, Teresa. I didn't know that with regards to medications and deployability. I appreciate you sharing that. Mandy, would love to hear your comments on potential policy changes under Pete Hegseth.
Well, it was like Teresa had my notes when she spoke about issues of the IG. But, it is my hope, and it is certainly in the talks, to create an independent IG, an independent Inspector General. This is something that is clearly near and dear to my heart, being a DoD whistleblower for the past 3 years and part of the IG, the ongoing 3-year IG complaint that has been done, investigation that's been done on Red Hill. I know this is something that's personal to Pete as well. And part of the reasons why he ended up leaving the military is that he had a target placed on his back. And I heard recently, he spoke about the institutional betrayal and the moral injury that he felt as a service member. When you become the leader that we are taught to be in our professional military education courses, which is a leader of moral integrity and, a leader who can lead with moral courage and the intestinal fortitude to speak up. We say all the time, see something, say something. But when you actually do that, when you make the hard right decision, I hate when we say that, because why should the right decision be hard? I'll tell you why. It is because a target is placed on your back, and because the military, the corrupt DOD and its IG and its leaders place, politics over people, personal gain over people. And unless you bury your head in the sand and you shut up and color, you are then, you're a target. I have felt over the past 3 years as an enemy of my own country. And that's a real hard pill to swallow. Again, being such a patriot and such, a huge military supporter and a multi-generation military gal. And, speaking of, Walk the Talk Foundation is doing amazing things. I was just on their podcast, part 1 of a 3-part series just dropped last week. I'm a huge fan of those guys and the work that they are doing. And it is my hope that since, Pete does know what that feels like, and I empathize with that, and I know exactly what it feels like, that an independent IG is something that he will look at. And I think that the corruption would go away. And I think that the patriotism and the honor and how proud we feel to serve, like that spirit would come back. For far too long, folks, they've been suppressed, they've been silenced, and they've not been able to be their true, authentic, patriotic self. And I hope that goes away.
So, quick question for you, Mandy. Just as I'm absorbing your comments here, have there been instances where the top level, the top brass has sabotaged leadership at the tactical level by chance? I'm trying to draw some perspectives out of this, meaning like somebody who was at Pete's level, is that not necessarily uncommon for somebody in that middle tier tactical level to be potentially sabotaged by the brass, by policies, whatever the case may be? Apparently Teresa and Amy are nodding their heads, but I want to hear your thoughts on it, Mandy, but Teresa, I'm going to come back to you and Amy on that question as well. Sorry.
So I would say the answer is yes. And I'll tell you this, and I speak a lot about Red Hill because I've been the Red Hill advocate for the past 3 years. I will tell you that not a single, even though the DODIG reports have just been released in November. So if you haven't had a chance to, skim those hundreds of documents over, please do. But it basically found that, the military was negligent and evidence was destroyed and key leaders knew, and they failed to warn families. And in doing that, they prevented people like me, parents, of protecting their children. They allowed leaders to not actually lead and not actually do what they are supposed to do in command positions, which is protect the people that serve underneath them. So what happened with that is over the past 3 years, not a single leader who was in charge of the Red Hill water crisis was held accountable. And in fact, if you look at who was the Pacific Fleet commander at the time, the most senior leader at the time, that person was nominated for CNO by the Secretary of Defense. When that wasn't accepted by the president, that person was then nominated by the Secretary of Defense to be the Indo-Pacific commander, the largest combatant command. And that's where he currently resides. So even that level of leadership was not held accountable. Every leader that's been in charge of this catastrophe that happened at Red Hill has either retired with their career intact or been able to move on with their career, pin another star, and serve in a position of increased responsibility. Pete, if confirmed, will have an enormous amount of power, and he will be able to clean some of that up. And I trust in him that leaders will be held accountable for their actions that they make in command positions.
So I don't want to sound like a broken record, but kudos for having bravery, because within a millisecond of me asking that question, I thought to myself, I probably shouldn't be asking Mandy this, being active duty. So serious kudos for stepping up and answering that. Teresa,
I'd also like to say, Chris, I don't mean to interrupt you, but clearly my views are my own and they are not the views of the DoD as a whole. But that is just my personal experience, both as a service member, but also a mother of impacted children of this crisis.
Yeah, I'm still kudos. Absolutely. Teresa, I want to hear your thoughts and then coming to you, Amy.
Well, first off, I do want to say that one of the things that we've seen through this podcast evolution is the fact that active duty are finally having a voice and being able to speak up and speak out. There's not only Mandy, there's Rob Green. He's a Navy commander who spoke up against the COVID vaccine. I currently have his book. Can't remember the title off the top of my head, but he is incredible and just an amazing whistleblower and advocate. So what comes to mind for me, because I've not been personally impacted, like Mandy, I'm not a whistleblower. In fact, I'm still serving on active duty. I don't have a major incident that happened to me. I have been a little bit blacklisted by my own community, by certain people, but I'm okay with that. I still have my supporters, even if sometimes it's on the down low. I do appreciate that. But the one case that really comes to mind that I encourage your viewers to look up is Captain Bradley Geary. That is just textbook blaming the person at the lowest level for institutional failures that occurred at SEAL school, where they really weren't given the support and the backing to do everything that was expected out of them. And then when, God forbid, they didn't have the testing in place for performance enhancing drugs, well, what did they do? Oh, they just blamed the commanding officer and thought they could easily get rid of him and be done with it and make everybody happy, and we would all move on. And they just picked the wrong guy to do that to, because some people would have done that. Some people would have just quietly retired and went away. And he said, no, I'm not doing that. And thankfully, he had the power of the Sean Ryan podcast to go on there, tell his story. And I talked to him personally. I had one very long conversation and then another follow-up conversation, because I really wanted to know every detail about it, because it was the Navy. It was my public affairs community. It impacted me. It really did, just because it was people I knew that were involved in this. And after learning more about this case, and I'm sure, Mandy, I'll feel the same way after I talk to you about Red Hill, I was just infuriated that something like this could happen. And that they could just blame the lowest person, that they could basically almost lie to the family, go out with a public affairs story that was not the correct narrative. And in the end, the charges were dropped. Why were they dropped? So it's disappointing. It is. And I'm confident that Pete Hegseth knows about these issues and is not only aware of these issues, he's on board with trying to fix them.
Appreciate that, Teresa. Amy, before I go to you, I just wanted to briefly, a quick anecdote that I wanted to share that's germane to this conversation, especially of undercutting somebody who's a leader at a lower level. After I left Sun Microsystems, we had a boutique consulting firm that catered to Fortune 1000 companies, and Mercedes was one of those clients. And the Germans will send engineers to North Carolina to work for 6 months or so, get their hands dirty, their practicum completed. Then they go back. And I got a call this one day from a couple engineers who I'd worked with, and they said, "Hey, we're driving to South Florida for the weekend. Would you like to have lunch tomorrow?" And I said, "Sure, that sounds great." So they got here to Central Florida. We had lunch together, and they started rhyming off all of these things with regards to America. America's this, America's that. And I said, "Not really." And they said, "Well, what do you mean? We've been here for 6 months and this is what we've seen." And I said, "Well, that's not even reflective of all of North Carolina. What you saw is Raleigh, Durham, and it's not applicable to the rest of the country. And that we are the United States of America, 50 autonomous states." And they said, "Well, there's got to be something that's common that weaves all of you together." And they were kind of surprised at my answer. I said, "Yeah, leadership." And they almost took an affront to it. And they said, "Well, we have great leaders in Germany." I said, "I have no doubt that you have great leaders in Germany." I said, "Have you all had any chance to see young American kids playing football?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, when kids are playing Pop Warner football and a player who's not the captain extends a hand to help up a player from the opposing team, in that snapshot of time, that is leadership." And I don't believe that any other culture around the world pounds that into their children's skulls like we do in America, as far as leadership is concerned. And I said to them, I said, "I would encourage you when you go back to Germany," this is 20 years ago, "that if you have the opportunity to discuss leadership with World War II vets on your side, ask them what they hated the most about fighting the Americans." Typically in military confrontations, if you take the leader out, you have the upper hand on the enemy. And the German soldiers, all of them after World War II, said they despised fighting us, because if they killed a leader at any level, somebody immediately stood up and took on that leadership role and just kept on trucking. And so I still, to this day, we've got some dents and bruises in the past 20, 25 years overall as a society, but I still think leadership is something that we have in spades. So Amy, I'd love to hear your perspective on speculate on potential policy changes under Pete Hegseth's purview.
Well, I think to piggyback on what Mandy said was the accountability factor. I think I've heard Pete talk on Fox News, and I'm a big fangirl of Pete's, just watching Fox. I miss him, seeing him do his weekend shows on Fox News, but he always kind of went back to the accountability, especially for the Afghan withdrawal. It was just so egregious that it was just so hard to understand and get over, that accountability for the lack of leadership, the lack of like, okay, I take responsibility for this. So I think I don't want to speculate, but I hope that they do a full scrub. And I know this to be true, that they are doing records searches right now for senior leaders, let's say 05, 06, 07 and above, who were involved in either the planning or the execution of the Afghan withdrawal, and that they get a by name list of who was involved so that they can escort them and see them to the door. Because Pete, along with all of us, are done with the fakers, the pretenders, these players, these CYAers, and we've had it. Because there's been no one fired, no accountability for that specific thing. And also the COVID vaccine mandates that ruined so many people's lives. And I heard that's coming as well. But those are my two predictions, that he's going to have teams to research and assess and find out a good course of action to mend the moral injury that a lot of us feel from those two things, for going along with it, pretending to think that well, that's normal. No, it's not normal. And so I think Pete is just one of us, you know, and his own experience as a guardsman when they told him, you don't come back here, you're not welcome, you're kicked out, or we'll find out more. But I think that's how his career ended, in a very sad way. And I'm sure he was heartbroken over it. And that's a moral injury that needs accountability. And so I hope that can return to the military.
And Amy, I just want to add, because I'm almost done with Pete's book, and he does go into that. Basically, they told him he was not needed at the DC Capitol. I want to say it was for the quote unquote insurrection. And John, you might know the story better than I do, but they didn't tell him the real reason. So he didn't find out till like 2 years later when he was writing his book, and he happened to talk to somebody who was honest with him and said, oh yeah, some junior people were trolling your social media and happened to see that you have an extremist tattoo. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Like, how in the world do you fire somebody from a position based on some people trolling your social media?
I will point out about that tattoo. That is the Jerusalem cross tattoo. It's a very common symbol in Christianity, and so common that when Jimmy Carter was laid to rest, the chapel that he was in, this was a couple of days ago, had the Jerusalem cross directly under his casket. So this is not extremist. This is something that is very common in America. Something, you know, Pete is very outspoken about his faith and what he believes in, and should have that right as an American. And that was just a complete and total, you know, and I could go on a very long rant about probably the real reason that they didn't want him commanding troops on that day. But yeah, it was completely and totally outrageous what they did to him.
So, John, before I turn it over to you for the next batch of questions, just a couple quick observations. Back to the leadership. I forgot. I missed one of my notes here. There was an incident, I want to say 2016, 2017 in Africa, where the Chinese were on a peacekeeping mission vis-a-vis the UN, and they got absolutely smoked by a bunch of villagers. And the autopsy, or the AAR, basically concluded that each leader inside of the Chinese military was afraid to do something until the person above them okayed it. Then they wouldn't do it till somebody above them okayed it. And General Valley and I just had a conversation on this, and he said, as advanced as China's become, that particular issue of everybody being frozen and afraid to make a decision without having the blessing from the person above them will probably result in a pretty negative experience for them. And then, Amy, to your comments on Afghanistan, we had JJ Carroll on last night. He's a good friend of mine. He was a CBP special agent for 23 years. He's done some amazing work on child sex trafficking. He's produced some incredible documentaries that revealed information that nobody else was discussing when he did that. And we were discussing the TDA gang, Trenda Aragua gang, working with the Sinaloa cartel and other cartels because they're very opportunistic. One of the things that happened as a result of Afghanistan that a lot of Americans are not aware of is I have a friend of mine whose father-in-law was the Minister of Defense in Pakistan when we had that disastrous withdrawal. And he was over there visiting them. And he's also an international arms dealer. And he was sending me screenshots from his phone of some service in Pakistan that's similar to Facebook Marketplace, where you could buy U.S. military closed bolt M249 saws for $1,200. You could buy PVS-14 night vision units for $100-$200, and everything else that you can imagine. Well, a good number of those weapons are now in the possession of the Sinaloa cartel, Hezbollah, which has been joined at the hip with Sinaloa for about 30 years now. And so we've essentially, not only did we lose 13 people's lives that day that should have never been lost, we've armed our enemies again. It's a horror story all the way around. I don't know how else to describe it, but John, go ahead and go into the leadership and representation stuff a little bit deeper.
Yeah, so I'll let Jess go first, kind of the same format we've been doing, and really, so this question is more on what we think, how Hegseth will deal with nuance of having females in the military, of the unique challenges that women face in the armed forces. And so do you believe that Hegseth would advocate, understand these kind of nuanced issues? Obviously for women, it's the military is a little bit different, and not that we are not that males and females are not equal. It's just a different experience for females. I'm sure all of you can attest to that is a different experience in the military. So do you feel like Pete has his finger on the pulse of this, or he would be open to understand these unique challenges? And how important is it that the top dog, the leader of the armed forces, the guy that sets all of the policies, how important is it for him to understand that?
I don't believe Pete Hegseth has an option to consider women in our experience, because we have become a prolific part of the population base in the U.S. military. We've proven for decades to be a linchpin based on the intellectual and the physical capabilities of our people, of the other women who I've served with, who astoundingly continue to showcase their strengths. And so, yes, we experience maybe different physical, psychological traumas, and especially speaking on behalf of the majority of women who go through sexual assault, sexual harassment, things that are very paramount to our gender itself, that continue to be an issue. He doesn't have the option of having those open conversations with us. And I do believe that he is very interested, invested in finding out more of what we go through as a unique population, because we contribute such a great amount from the lowest ranks to the highest ranks. And there are a minimal portion of women serving at a higher capacity. But I don't doubt that he wouldn't be interested in helping more women get to higher positions of leadership, because he knows what our capabilities are. So again, it's a matter of the media misconstruing his comments of women being in combat roles. And Amy, thank you for specifying the issues around jobs, MOSs specifically, and what that can do. But it's not a matter of consideration. It's a matter of when and how he's going to address the topic at hand with women, which I believe he will.
Yeah, yeah, understood. So I'm going to go ahead and go to Teresa, and we'll get your take on this, and how important is it that the leader understand these unique differences for females in the military?
Yeah, like Jessica said, he isn't going to have the option. We have already proven that we are a integral part. I mean, one example is the female engagement teams. We cannot operate in certain areas of the world without having our female engagement teams interacting with the women, getting information, building rapport. So that is going to have to continue to happen. And not only that, but all the occupational specialties where we give to the fight. And I think another thing that hasn't been brought up yet about Pete, and something that I can just sense by the way he works, by his experience, by the way he tackles difficult questions, is that Pete is a doer. He is not I don't know how to put it, but he's not one of these intellectuals that sit on their laurels and then think big thoughts and don't get anything done. I don't get that sense when I watch him. When I watch him, I get that he's the kind of person that if he has to get his hands dirty and sometimes do some of the grunt work, he's going to do it. And that just makes me feel very safe with him as a leader, because I don't want somebody that thinks big thoughts and isn't willing to lift a finger to do any actual work. And sadly, I've worked for some flag officers that would fall into that category. And it's very disheartening when that happens, and it's frustrating. And he's not the kind of person that I see would do that. In fact, I think I read in his book that he was the guy that was always willing to work the weekends at Fox. He was the guy who always was an underdog. And I really relate to that as well, because I feel like sometimes I'm an underdog. And I think that just makes you hungry. It makes you enthusiastic. And when you watch him, you're just motivated because you see his passion and you see that he wants our military to be better, and he wants us to go back to what we ought to be doing, which is winning wars, being lethal, and being the most combat effective force that we can be.
Yeah, I think, and I'll just say this: in my 12 years in the military, some of the most professionally squared away people that I worked with were females, just honestly, and I will say that very, very boldly, because I think that societally, in some ways, and it's unfortunate, you guys do have a different kind of microscope on you. It's just like they'll look and say, oh, well, she can't do this. And honestly, some of the best, most squared away professional people that I've ever worked with in my life were females in the military that I served with. And that's so I'm definitely not in the other camp at all. But I think it's a very, very important thing for people to understand that the reason we win wars, the reason we have a vibrant military, is for both men and women doing a job professionally and doing the best job that they can. And all of the other stuff, I've said this many times on this podcast, the military is about breaking stuff and killing people. And if we are doing that, and we're doing that in the best way possible, then we're doing our job. So I'm going to go to you, Mandy, and give you a chance to answer that question as well, and give your opinion or any other things that you want to say about this topic.
Sure. So I think, as Amy said earlier, I don't think Pete is in a position or will make a unilateral decision on this point, on this topic. I also think that some of the comments that Pete has made come from a place of being a man in the military, right? Pete is not a woman. And so he doesn't have the lived experiences of being a woman in the military. And that's where we come in. That's where, strong, outspoken women leaders and women who do serve in combat arms, I think, will be placed. I think Pete will want to bring those women in to his team. And I think he is an open-minded and a very humble human. And I think that he will be open to listening the lived experiences of women in the military, women who do serve in combat roles. And then I think that his opinion may change, or, he may decide to do things that, are a little different. Those will be his decisions, and the decisions of him. And again, his critical advisors, which I think will be some women.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that really the the big thing here is we're dispelling on this podcast. We're also dispelling some of the rumors. And that's why we're asking these questions a specific way, is because we want you guys to give an account as females that drives a different angle against the narrative. Because in the media, all of us know that it's all about narrative. The entire thing is about narrative. And we want to break through those narratives and give the truth of what actual experienced females in the military think, and that it's not at all what the media is trying to feed us as a false narrative. So, Amy, I'm going to give you a chance to answer that, and then we'll go to the next question.
Yeah, well, I think Pete is sort of that newer generation. He's 44 years old, and maybe he's, as Teresa said, not an intellectual, but he's an academic. He went to Princeton. He went to Harvard for graduate school. And, he's a hard worker. Working in TV is not easy. You have to be on time every time. He's out there doing the work. He's a people person. He gets people. And what I think is most important to kind of realize is that he's not been institutionalized in the military. He may be an infantry officer, but he didn't grow up in the military and being brainwashed to believe that women are bad. They don't belong in the military. He's an educated person. He's worked with lots of women in his civilian careers, nonprofit work, and then working at Fox and just being out with Americans. So, I think he's of that early generation where he could be, he takes all information. He doesn't have to, hold the line on what, just because someone told him to say these things and believe this way. He's an independent thinker, like Mandy said. So I wouldn't be supporting him if I didn't feel like that. And I think the four of us on the call today, we've seen our share of go along to get along type people, and the institutionalized, women are evil. They don't belong in the military. And I've heard that 1,000 times. So I know when you feel it and you just know it. You know those are those people that don't want women around. They don't think they should be there. But I don't get that from Pete at all. And so while he can have an intellectual conversation and a good debate, and I think women like us can help shared experiences. Here's what I experienced in my combat deployments. Here's some dynamics that could be a problem, but I think we can overcome them. So I think he's young enough and not jaded and brought up institutionalized to be able to overcome some of those hesitations or preconceived thoughts, but maybe there's always room for growth and room to take in other people's perceptions.
Yep. Well said. Well said. So the next question, and I'll go back to Jess on this one, is about the unit cohesion and effectiveness. So how do you feel about that, if any effect that Pete's views or the statements that he's made would have on unit cohesion and the combat effectiveness for a mixed gender military? What, if any, effect does that have? And do you feel like the military's effectiveness and lethality has been impacted positively or negatively by the inclusion of women in combat roles?
I don't have the direct experience to speak about the combat roles specifically. I never deployed, and I was over in Japan covering a lot of the exercises and operations over there. So I can say that, and Amy, you might have some really cool knowledge base from the lineage of the combat correspondent field to chime in on this. But when I joined in 2012, of course, we had women in the combat correspondent role. When it came to the individuals that were being deployed, it was oftentimes that the men were selected, at least with the units that I was at. And so having the opportunity to go out more is something that we've definitely fought for. And I don't know if within my field, we really had issues with integrating the females into the training exercises where it was predominantly men. We were the ones with the camera always telling the story. And I think because we come into the situation with so much curiosity about that person or that mission, that it allows us to come in with a fresh palette. And with that mindset, even if you're working with, say, men who have maybe a misogynistic viewpoint of women in those roles, they can't help but appreciate our sense of curiosity about them as a photojournalist. So it's a matter of experience and curiosity and open conversation and dialogue without, necessarily taking personal attacks. This is something that I wish I had more experience on, but ultimately it's hard to tell what's going to happen when we continue to integrate women into different combat roles. I think there's always a possibility for it. But again, as long as it's not detrimental to the mission and what's going on, there are things, and this is the fascinating the fascinating stance that I have building a military travel community that comes from a lot of the neuroscience around behavior and the physiological effects of trauma. When we look at what happens when we combine men and women in high pressure environments with severe stimuli that is putting them in a primal fight or flight zone, what happens to the mammalian brain when a man sees a woman in a position that is compromised and of safety, right? What is his natural inclination as a male to do? And so does that affect how women are integrated in a situation where there's deadly force? Does that shift that man's perspective on how to act because of a woman's presence? I don't know. These are great things to have conversations about. And there is a difference in it when it boils down to the science of how different men and women are. And that you can't ignore. It's something that we're seeing in the trauma fields and how men and women respond differently to the physiological effects of their environment. So it's something that we need to discuss either way. And like I said, I think Pete Hegseth is open to that conversation, but he's not going to ignore the glaring science and the facts and data that come from perhaps those surveys.
Yeah. And Jess, you mentioned Amy, so I'm actually going to jump to Amy and then come back to Mandy and Teresa and let you answer this question, as I think you would probably have some unique insight on this. You're muted.
Thanks for that. I do feel there's been a huge shift since the time that I joined in the early 90s to after 9/11, when more women were serving in roles, serving in Iraq and Afghanistan, being killed in combat. I just looked it up. There was 166 women service members in uniform who were killed between Iraq and Afghanistan. And that changed the game, because what I would hear and see and feel and sense men saying, you know what, if she is going to kid up and step off into harm's way, then she's good to go in my book. And so when Megan McClung was killed, she was my teammate. You know, that got people's attention. She was a major at the time, a Marine Corps major. And so it just shifted the dynamics. And so we said, okay, if women are willing to put it on the line, risk everything, then that's okay in my book, as opposed to the early days or when I served, when I first came in, it was like, oh, we can't see women coming home killed in combat. But you know what? That evolution is already almost completed, because this next generation of people coming into the military, they grew up with that. That's not really a big deal anymore. So I think being fully integrated, knowing that women are willing to risk everything, that's what men are saying, okay, I'm no longer the only ones to shoulder that burden anymore. We're going to share that burden of serving our country as patriots. Everyone has something to risk. Everyone is at risk no matter what. And so I just might share too that my grandmother was an Army nurse, and she was in a combat zone in Guam and Saipan during the island hopping campaigns. And that's where she met my grandfather, who was a Marine, Amtracker. They met on Guam during the war. When the war was over, they came home back to the States. But so women in serving in combat zone is kind of nothing new, but I think now that we're more talking about it. But if anyone is willing to risk everything, go forward and step off and do their job, I think that sends a signal of mutual respect. And so I think we can just share these stories more about women who are quietly doing their job, risking everything on warships, pilots, female engagement teams, combat photographers. They're out there doing the job professionally. I think that we're over that evolution of integrating women. And so I think that this next generation is ready to accept that as being the norm.
Yeah, I'm glad that you actually brought that up, because going back all the way to World War II, when you talk about when the Japanese first, directly after Pearl Harbor, I think there was a movie about this called Women of Valor or something like that back in the 1970s. And it talked about an Army nurse unit that was actually captured by the Japanese and turned in a prison camp for the entirety of the war, went through all of the horrible things that you could imagine, and came out stronger than. So to think that we haven't seen this before would be that you're just blind to history, because this has been a reality for a very long time. You know, women can show just the same amount of courage that men can. There is no difference there. So I completely agree with your statement there. I'm going to jump back over to you, Therese, and kind of get back in our clockwise pattern, and you go ahead and speak on this as well.
Yeah. So the only thing that I will add, and this sort of talks about kind of what Jessica got into, is that the only piece that I really want to see a more robust discussion on is how women have fared in an urban fighting environment in open combat. I've not heard if that's happened or not. And if it has, I want to know what the cohesion was like. I want to know what the breakdown of how those battles turned out. And because all this stuff is so politicized, we don't often get those stories. And that's the only argument that I see against women in combat would be, your battle buddy is dying in a street fight, and will a woman have the same physical strength to pull the guy out of the firefight? And again, it goes back to what Jessica said too. Will there be some of these innate protection, instinctual mechanisms that come in that might decrease combat effectiveness? I'm not saying one way or the other that I know these answers, but what I'm saying is I think Pete Hegseth is willing to have those difficult discussions. He's willing to touch these quote unquote sacred cows and say, let's have a discussion about how this has looked from 2015 to 2024 and say, has it been impactful? Has it been effective? And there's another issue that we haven't even talked about, which is a issue that I have heard time and time again, and I'm having somebody on my podcast that's going to talk about it, and that's the gear issue. Are we giving our women who are in urban street fighting environments the proper gear to fight in a we need to be studying what's happening in Israel. We need to be, I mean, not Israel, oh gosh, sorry,
Ukraine.
Gaza, Ukraine. And we need to be looking at it, and Israel. We need to be looking at those combat urban environments. We need to see where they're putting women, and we need to see what the results are of putting women in these hostile environments. And I don't have the data to talk to those issues, and I hope that Pete will, because I think that's where these discussions need to go, and they need to be non-politicized, non-partisan, and they need to be factual. And then we need to move forward and say, okay, are we going to continue to do this the way that we've been doing it? And if so, are we going to properly equip women with the proper fitting gear? And are we going to do everything that we can to make sure for men and women that we're preventing injuries?
Yeah. And for people that think that women aren't effective in combat, I'll draw your attention to the deadliest sniper in history has 309 kills, and it was a Russian woman. Just FYI. The Russians used, you could ask the German army of World War II whether the Russian female snipers were effective or not. They killed an awful lot of Germans in Stalingrad and a lot of other places. So, yeah, it's not saying that they can't fulfill those roles at all. Mandy, I'm going to go to you next. Mandy, are you? Whenever you get a chance.
I think that she had just said she didn't really have anything to add.
Oh,
right,
okay.
Mandy?
Sorry.
Yeah.
So I'm going to hand it back over to Chris for continuing on with the questions here.
Yeah, just a quick comment. So I don't know if you all know Don Mann, spelt with two N's on the end. He was multiple SEAL Team 6, 1, and 2. He has a TV show called Surviving Man, which is real, true reality TV. I mean, it's crazy stuff like taking contestants out in the middle of the night in waist deep swamps in Florida on recce missions and stuff like that. And you're surrounded by gators and all sorts of other critters that like to kill people. One of the contestants on his show, her name's Lanny Barnes. And my wife and I host Surviving Man Aftermath on the Pursuit channel. And we also make some cameo appearances on the main one. So we've got to work with Lanny. She's the chief experience officer at Prairie Fire, which used to be called Front Sight. It's an amazing training facility in Pahrump, Nevada. She is a multi-time world champion shooter. And in the last Surviving Man All-Stars, which hasn't been published yet, it's coming out here shortly on Pursuit channel, out of 16 competitors, she smoked everybody when it came to the run and gun stuff. So the suggestion that women can't function in that type of a role, I can tell you after that, there were some pretty humble men that thought they were hot shot shooters until they had to go up against Lanny. And she even let them use one of her guns that she won a world championship with. So anyway, just an anecdotal sidebar to it. So Jess, we'll start with you. And I want to kind of pick up where I left off a little bit. Did you
Chris,
yeah.
Sorry, can I just share a stat with you?
Absolutely.
I wanted to kind of bring your attention to two women who were killed in combat, Jennifer Marino and Ashley White. And they even made a movie called Ashley's War. And they were part of the cultural support teams, part of the special operations task force in Afghanistan. And they were both killed in combat. And I remember being in Afghanistan when Jennifer Marino was there, and the response and the reaction was, there we go, Ashley's War. So to the team that they were with, of course, it's sad when anyone is killed, and the types of injuries that they sustained were from IEDs. And so to kind of separate the two topics out of like physical strength and endurance and stamina, and then being attacked by an IED, survival isn't based on like your physical, attributes or your kit, or it's just one of those unlucky, very sad and unfortunate things that happen in sort of a modern battlefield warfare, is that if it were a guy, it would have been the same sort of result. It wasn't a survivability factor because she was a woman, or she was killed because of being a woman, or the kit didn't fit, or it was simply just the luck of the draw. Same with the women who were at the Abbey Gate in proximity of the suicide vest bomber in the Afghan withdrawal, and same with men getting killed and women getting killed. And so those two distinctions and trying to compare, I just think that it's unfair to say, well, look, they got killed because of, or something. It's sort of like, if it's your unlucky day, it's your unlucky day. And that's sort of what we've seen over the 20 years in combat. There was no rhyme or reason. It didn't matter what rank, what job, what gender. And so that just really flipped the script on what we thought this perception of only the young junior enlisted infantrymen in Vietnam were getting killed because they were on the front lines. And if you couldn't run fast enough, you were the slow one to get killed. But it's all flipped on its head nowadays with survivability, and then the dynamics between the units and who's getting killed and who's not. So I just wanted to bring that up as an important topic. If analyzing the data, does it make any difference? Would it have made a difference of the gender of survivability for those women at the Abbey Gate? Probably not. And the women who were killed in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was no surviving that an IED or a complex attack or something like that. I haven't heard of one report to say, well, that the woman who was the gunner or the driver or something just couldn't act fast enough or respond fast enough as they were trained. I mean, you have the Jessica Lynch incident, for those who don't remember that. But again, the Army took that in a different direction. But just some things to consider, cases where we can take the data and say, did this happen because it was a woman or a specific case? So that's all I just wanted to point out. Thanks.
Yeah, valid comment, Amy. I mean, some of that stuff is really hard to quantify because of all the different factors that go into it. I mean, I'm a walking example of wrong place at the wrong time. 1996, I had a track come off a snowmobile and hit me in the left side of my face. And I've had 32 surgeries under general anesthesia, but it destroyed my left eye in the process. That's a prosthetic eye. It could have happened to anybody, just wrong place, wrong time. So that's what I mean by quantify. Like, how do you quantify that it just wasn't the person in the wrong place at the wrong time? So I don't want to harp on too much about some of the topics we've already covered, but I want to come at this from a slightly different angle. I'll go to Jess first and then everybody else. So as someone who served, Jess, is there any credence to the argument that some people have made, and I'm watching them being made in our, on chat across 6 different platforms right now, more complicated? So I think the angle that some of the guys in the chat are saying, that any man who sees a woman injured or killed is not going to react the same way as if it was a guy. And there may be substance to that or not, but I'm curious what each of you have opinion wise. Does it complicate anything?
I appreciate Amy for making that astute point, because at the end of the day, it is wrong time, wrong place. I think we have this traditional Hollywood scene and idea of what combat is, and that's migrating from a small unit movement to rush a building, ambush the enemy, and then you end up getting in a knife-to-knife hand fight, right? Where you're having to grapple somebody to the floor in full load. And that may happen, but at the end of the day, like Amy said, there are these very untraditional factors that come into play when it comes to combat that have nothing to do with hand-to-hand fighting and getting on the ground with the enemy. That distorts our reality of what it means to have women in combat. So there are complexities, I believe, when it comes to managing some logistics, but having been in the outdoor industry, actually spending 2 months of my time in the country as a woman with no hygiene facilities or support to take care of myself, I think that's also a common discussion around how women can make sure that they're healthy and clean. That wasn't an issue for me. And that was just straight up in the backcountry doing an outdoor educator course in support of my business. So whether it's austere environments like that or managing it in the Pacific Theater or the Middle East, women are going to figure it out like we have been figuring it out for many, many years. A matter of complication is just lack of communication that's happening ultimately.
Great answer, Jess. Teresa?
I would also add that it's lack of proper leadership. When you have leaders who understand how to inspire and motivate troops, they're going to weed out some of those problems that are happening between men and women. Because let's face it, there's problems between women and women. There's problems between men and men. And good leaders know their people and will step in and will have those difficult conversations to ensure that our environments are safe. And a good leader is approachable, checks in with their people. And if a female or a male is not feeling safe in that particular environment, you would like to think that they have a leader who will look at those issues and will take swift action to correct those issues. People thought the same thing when women went on subs. They thought the same thing with women in ships. Oh no, this is gonna, and guess what? Our ships still went to sea. Our submarines still went under the water. So I think that a lot of the issues with the cohesion issue is quite over. I wouldn't say overblown, but it's something that has to be managed with good order and discipline and with proper leadership. But it's not insurmountable. And if you look at the totality of what women bring to the table and the mission effectiveness and lethality that female service members provide, it is worth it to work through some of these challenges to ensure that we are the most lethal force. There is a reason why we are trying so hard to recruit women within the armed forces. We realize, and it's not just because of the DEI nonsense. It's because women are critical to the fight, as Amy said. And we need to have an engaged military that represents all of our Americans, women, men, different races, different cultural affiliations, diversity of ideas. So the diversity thing is wonderful. Where it gets problematic is when it's diversity at the expense of merit. And I think that's also what Pete Hegseth is really harping on. He's not saying he doesn't want to serve alongside people of all different races or genders, or in my opinion, there's only a female and male gender, but he's saying that it needs to be at the cost of merit. So it needs to be the person who is qualified, not the person who happens to be a particular gender, not the person who happens to be a particular race. And the other thing that we don't often talk about when we talk about diversity is diversity of ideas. And one of the things that a lot of people have felt under the Biden administration was that if you were a particular political affiliation, I would say more towards right of center, you were discriminated against. And I can tell you firsthand that there were certain subjects that you couldn't talk about at all. And the transgender issue was one of them. I've wanted to talk about that issue forever on my podcast, but I'm terrified of it because of the fact that it's such a sacred cow that nobody wants to acknowledge is an issue and is questionable, like Jessica said. We're all struggling with how we talk about it. I mean, I'm no different. I've got friends who are who identify as transgender, and I don't want to offend them, but I also do feel, as Jessica said, that there is evidence out there that this might also be a mental health issue. And it's something that's difficult for people to talk about. And I'm encouraged that somebody like Pete Hegseth is willing to tackle some of these difficult issues and work through them and solve problems.
Great answer, Teresa. So I'm going to go to Mandy. Are you still with us? You good for the next one?
Yeah. Yes. Can you hear me now?
Gotcha. Yeah, just confirming.
Okay,
So
good.
I want to come at this from a slightly different angle, and Teresa stole my thunder on this one, but I want to hear both your opinion and Amy's on DEI versus MEI. So in the corporate world, we're seeing a lot of people discuss MEI, merit, excellence, and intelligence, versus the DEI stuff. And a number of major corporations have been pivoting, dropping their DEI, moving to MEI. And if I'm hearing everybody correctly, I know what Teresa's answer is because she just gave it without me even asking the question. But what's your perspective on merit versus diversity, I guess?
All right, I'm putting a pin in that. I'm writing it down so I come back to it. But I did want to comment on your original question, which, for your male listeners, for your men in uniform and just for your audience in general, I just want to remind everyone that, when everyone goes in the military, they raise their right hand knowing that there's an inherent risk, regardless of gender. So when I raised my right hand, I knew that when I went downrange in Afghanistan with the 82nd, that there was a potential I may not come back. I also, was responsible for processing casualties, downrange, both in Afghanistan and then in a garrison environment too. And I'll tell you that regardless of gender, a loss or a casualty is tough no matter what. We are brothers and sisters in arms. And that does not, make it doesn't, in my opinion, make it any different, whether it is a, female casualty or a male casualty. It's unfortunate either way. So, I want everyone to recognize that when women join the military, they understand that there's inherent risk and they are willing to take that risk and they are willing to, make that sacrifice for their country and to be part of the less than 1% who volunteers to serve. As far as DEI and MEI, here's what I'll say on that. I'm so sick of it, to be completely honest. I'll tell you that I don't care about the first of everything. I'll tell you that, we had the first female Secretary of the Army. And while I was really excited about that in the beginning, I'll tell you that she didn't have any more compassion for the families, for the 93,000 people who were harmed at Red Hill, despite meeting with her office and communicating with her directly. When she came to Hawaii, she never met with a Red Hill impacted family. As a mother, as a woman, it didn't make her any different. So, quite honestly, I'm a little bit over the DEI conversation. I'm all about merit-based, regardless of gender. The most qualified should serve in the position. And that's all I'll say on that.
Great answer. Absolutely great answer. Amy, DEI versus MEI.
Well, of course, merit is where it's at. And top talent attracts top talent. We need the most talented people in the military. And pinpointing the reason why top talent is not flocking into the ranks, I think we can see 20 years of some serious failed missions, lack of accountability, lack of leadership. And so who wants their children to go serve in the military? I'm just checking out some of the comments in the chat. Someone did mention about women registering for the draft. And I know this is a tangent, but I want to just bring this up as a point of equality in terms of being equal, is that I do feel that not only can women serve in combat roles or combat zone, but I do believe that women should, if the registration for the selective service is something for men, it should also be something for women too. Because when women have skin in the game, they have equal citizenry in America. We pay the same taxes based on what we earn, but there's just something missing. It just makes us feel, and the perception is that the sort of you're less of a full citizen, full birthright citizenship, when only men have to do a certain step and register for selective service. Now, if the country goes to war and we start doing a draft and needing extra people, why not just have that pool of talented people ready and willing to serve? Because the shortage is real. People who are not qualified to serve, whether it's in academics, they can't read or write, they can't read the manuals, they can't operate the equipment, they cannot function in the way that the Army and the Navy and the Air Force Marine Corps is structured right now. And I assure you, and just maybe working in recruiting, you saw some early stages. But I know recruiters right now who literally they're graduated from high school, but that does not mean that they actually qualify for military service. So the lack of applicants means we have to turn to women who can read and write and be able to do the physical aspects of being in the military. So the crisis is real, and merit is really the only way that we can function. If we're not going to have accident after accident, mishap after mishap, and when life and limb are at stake, we need to get back to the people who can actually do the job. And if that means expanding more roles to women who can read, write, and perform, that's what we need to do. But changing that obligatory, I'm a U.S. citizen, therefore I either need to register for the selective service as well and or serve. Before, that's just been the burden of men. But I think we need to bring it back to both men and women, is my thoughts on that. And I hope Pete can maybe shed some light on that and maybe move that needle in that direction.
Yeah, the only comment I'll make before I pass it back to John is that I think a major problem that we've had in America is this conflation between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. You know, we're not all equal in all aspects. And one of the things I love to point out to people, I'll be 56 in a few weeks. And when I went to banks, you know, as in my younger years, let's say the 80s, even to the early 90s, every bank manager was a male. Not that we go to banks frequently today like we did back then, but I haven't seen a male bank manager in decades. It's all women. And my personal experience and this is just anecdotal, is that women are far more pragmatic than men are on the whole. There's always going to be outliers, but that pragmatism of, you know, crossing every T and dotting every I makes women better skilled to do jobs like bank managers, run underwriting departments, all that sort of stuff. Because most of us men, we look at something and say, okay, we're going to go take that hill over there. And when we're done taking that hill, we'll be bored with it. So you guys can take the hill and make it the best hill in the world, because now we're going to go take that hill over there. And that's not very well suited to some roles. So there's plenty of roles where you could, you know, women excel, and there's other roles where men excel. So I'll get off my soapbox on that and turn it back to you, John.
Oh, Chris, I do want to add also one other
Sure.
thing is that I do also notice with women, because we tend to be a little bit more relationship driven, whereas men are more functional or tactile driven.
Mm-hmm.
And so what they have found is having a woman at the table or on teams will a lot of times get to a more collaborative answer. And there's more voices that sometimes get included into the solution because of the presence of a woman. So I would say that I'm probably the outlier, Chris. My husband is the detail guy. He's the OCD, and I'm kind of the person in the clouds and the artist. But
Yeah.
so there's definitely differences. I definitely am not the person that's going to dot all the T's or cross the I's, but definitely I'm much more relationship driven than my husband. Talking is like a foreign language to him. So so definitely there are differences between men and women, and we ought to celebrate that. Like, why do we not want to respect and honor those differences and actually use them to our advantage? The female engagement team is a perfect example of using the skills that women bring to the table to make us as lethal as possible. So I just wanted to add that.
No, valid for sure. I don't know about you, John, but all I heard was women keep men honest.
As a man who's been married for 16 years, I can tell you I could not function without my wife on a daily basis. So,
You're right.
And she completes everything that I'm bad at, you know. So, and I think that's really probably what you're talking about the most, is that there are aspects of this that women fill in gaps that men traditionally, and I'm talking generally, I'm not talking everything, as Teresa pointed out, you know, there are outliers and everything, but I think that having that different thought process is important to having a well-rounded idea, a well-rounded concept, and a well-rounded, tactics and vision for military operations or anything in life. But I wanted to kind of go through, Pete has, he's clarified some of his comments about some of the greatest warriors that he has known in his military career have been women. And like I said earlier, some of the most professional and put together people that I ever worked with in multiple places around the world were women. So how does that, those recent statements, how do they resonate with you in light of some of the earlier comments that really, I think we've already established those were taken out of context to a certain extent as well, and not fully put into, the nuance of what he was talking about? And also, do you believe that Hegseth's public clarification on his views indicate a genuine understanding of, or is it just a political maneuvering because now he has been put into the role or as nominated for Secretary of Defense? So Jess, I'm going to let you tackle that kind of two-part question first.
He discussed this with Megyn Kelly, especially in terms of the allegations on the sexual assault and his influence around the huge problem that there is within the military itself. And he knows that this is a dark corner that we are still trying to address, and men face this problem too. So I think there's even more so a personal intent to really investigate this problem within the military that touches so many lives of women, but also men, because it's influenced his nomination as Secretary of Defense. So I really appreciate that he's brought that to light and how the allegations have actually disempowered women who have gone through these traumatic experiences, and it takes away the credibility when clearly a story of complete make-believe has been used as the anatomy to smear his life and his pursuits in the leadership role. So I just think it's a really good thing to be able to actually have a personal note for him to speak on behalf of women who are going through some of these issues. And I don't get the sense that he's doing things for fluff and the salutations or the flatteries. He's a grassroots guy doing things for a lot of us who saw from the very beginning that things were taking a dark turn. And we're not saying the military is perfect. We're very aware of the frustrations that are a part of kind of the tapestry of the military. We almost like expect it at this point, and it kind of makes it a part of the experience, this fat, juicy experience that is sometimes frustrating, but there is camaraderie and suffering, and sometimes we enjoy it silently and quietly and oddly and weirdly enjoy it. But he's somebody who I don't believe is sitting around contemplating on how he can make himself look a certain way to just get in a position so he can be successful. Like Amy spoke to, he is an officer, but he's very grassroots in his approach. And I think, especially for me, maybe perhaps being the youngest person on this discussion, that still really heavily speaks to me. I get inspired by the conversations that he's having because I feel that he's not just some old fart that got high up on a castle somewhere and decided to make decisions that aren't actually going to be influential to the guys and gals at the bottom doing the work. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he does.
Yeah. Earlier this week, we had a panel of Navy SEALs, and one thing that was said, and I think it was Bill that said it, was that a lot of the upper echelon military leadership that is in place right now, when GWAT started, Global War on Terrorism, for those of you that don't know what I'm referring to, when that started, they were all already in an operational officer level. They weren't in combat roles. They weren't actually on the ground with troops having to make those decisions. So there's somewhat of a disconnect there. When you see that upper echelon, when you become a higher ranking officer, there is a certain amount of politics that is involved with that. Once you get past that probably 04, 05 level, you become more engaged in the political world because you're talking about larger unit bases. You're talking about, larger logistical patterns. You're talking about all of this stuff. It's not necessarily just hey, I've got this platoon or this company that I need to take here and take this hill. So how are we going to do that? It's a much more macro view of the military as opposed to a micro view. And I think that really what's refreshing about Pete is the fact that he came up in the middle of combat. He came up in that world. So to me, that means that he understands the ground level troop more than a lot of our higher echelon officers. Not saying that they don't understand them, but I think that he has a deeper understanding, having gone through that and actually led people in combat and seen all of those little nuances and what happens to those troops. So, Teresa, I'm going to go to you on this with him kind of, I wouldn't say changing his stance, but just clarifying his comments about women in the military and all of that stuff. So I'll give the floor to you.
Well, one of the things that I also wanted to touch upon, and I get this a lot from the people who are not happy with the stance that I took on Pete Hegseth, is that they'll bring up the anonymous allegations, either the ones about his veteran nonprofit or about the incident that happened many, many years ago when he was going through a tumultuous period in his own personal life. And it really upsets me when people bring that up because, number one, there were no charges. He was not charged with a crime. Number two, the police report is public. Number three, Megyn Kelly dissected the police report. I always try to point people to that and let them make their own decisions. Number four, we are not in a courtroom. We don't have access to all the evidence of that issue. But the many people that I talk to that just assume that he committed a crime when nobody else has come forward, when there's no longer an NDA, and this person could easily come forward and share her story, but hasn't. So it just upsets me, and it makes me think that these people are sadly being misled by the media, some of the legacy media outlets on this issue, instead of doing their own research and looking into some of these issues. Because as a woman, I wouldn't want to support somebody if I thought they were a predator. But I look at things like, his lawyer is Tim Parlatore, and Tim Parlatore has been on my podcast, and I can tell you that guy would never, never stand for something like that. So I have to look at those things and really question them and make my own decision on how I feel on these issues. And so I do think that Pete's going to be very, very compassionate and also very determined to root out some of these issues in terms of sexual assault, sexual harassment, toxic work environments. I do believe that he wants good teammates. He wants us to win wars, and he wants us to be lethal, and he wants us to be effective. And those are ways that will be effective. If we've got sexual assault, if we've got bad bosses. I mean, one of the things that Pete talks about in his book is that we've prioritized careerism and getting promoted and not mission effectiveness. There's no standard or test for the things that you have accomplished in a pressurized situation as the bar for if you promote or not. I can tell you personally that you promote based on who likes you. And if the right admirals have looked at your record and decided that you're one of their golden children, and if you are, then you get promoted. If you are not, then you don't get promoted. And that's not effective. And that's why you have a lot of yes men and yes women at the top of our military. And I get the sense that Pete feels the same way. And I think he's going to clean up a lot of that. And I'm looking forward to it.
Yes. And refer to my previous comments about the upper echelon of the military being very political. And that's in some ways, when you get to a certain level, you have to play that political game in order to advance your career. It's unfortunate, but it is the way it is. And I hope that there are some reforms coming in that respect as well, to where it is a true meritocracy, because in all honesty, one of the biggest things that I would say is an issue in the upper echelon of the military is that political, for lack of a better term, good old boys club that promotes based off of who you know. It's like being in a union. So anyways, Mandy, I'm going to go ahead and shift to the next topic, really, and let you and Amy speak to this. Is there and Teresa kind of segued for me into this. The allegations. This is the elephant in the room. I do believe that there have been plenty of people that have dissected a lot of this this one in particular allegation of SA that was pushed out. And Megyn Kelly, for our audience, if you haven't seen it, Megyn Kelly did a full blown analysis of both the police report and all of the other stuff. The police report, or the police didn't actually even see the need to bring charges against Pete, but I do want to speak, because this is different coming from a man's perspective and coming from a woman's perspective. And I think that there is something that needs, why we have these 4 women that have served honorably in the military, still serving in some cases, that are coming out and actually taking this stand and saying, we support Pete. And there's still all these allegations going on that he's a womanizer, he's an alcoholic, he's all of these things. And so I want to give you a chance to speak to that and why you feel like he still is merited with your support.
Yeah, so first of all, I have been a nationally certified sexual assault victim advocate in the military since 2016 or 17. And so I take sexual harassment and assault very seriously in the military. I will also say that had this been investigated in the military, I may not be as confident in that investigation as I am that it was done in the outside. And I know we've made great strides and are doing that in the military now. But, like Teresa said, this was investigated, and his name has been cleared, and that situation has been rectified. And if I thought for 1 second that Pete Hegseth was a sexual predator, he would not have my support. I would not have written, a letter of support to the Senate Armed Services Committee, and I would not risk, my professional reputation in the military sexual assault community by offering my support to him if I thought that these allegations, if there was any merit to them. Also as a God-fearing woman, I believe that we all have fallen short. Pete is a God-fearing man as well, and he's a Christian. And I believe that, Pete is a sinner like all of us. I think that Pete has probably made mistakes in his life, just as every person here on this panel, and just as every congressional member who will be questioning him during, the confirmation hearing. I believe that, the only person who, should judge Pete is God and God himself, and he'll meet his creator one day. Pete has been, cleared of this allegation of sexual assault. And as far as, the rumors, Pete has been a public figure for quite some time. And he has put himself in the public limelight, and he has been scrutinized for years, just as, as any public official will. And politics are nasty. I didn't know anything about it until I started going to advocate on the Hill for Red Hill. But what I will say is that, this is all part of the game. He knew what he was signing up for when he accepted this nomination from our, incoming president. I think it's actually a great thing. I mean, it might be brutal on Tuesday, but I think it's a great thing that all of these issues have been raised and that he does get an opportunity to be questioned and to answer. He's had some time to think about it. This has probably humbled him, and he's been able to think about it from multiple perspectives. And I think it's a great thing that, he will be in this hearing and he will be answering the tough questions, and we'll all hear that, what those answers are. But again, I just want to make very clear that if I thought that there was any truth to these allegations, I would not be here on this podcast. I would not have written a letter. I would not jeopardize my professional military reputation on this man. But I think that he's the right man for the job. And I think that he's come a long way. And I think from past mistakes, it has humbled him. It's made him more of a, compassionate leader, and it's made him more of a gracious leader and a humble leader. And I think that, I guess the last thing I want to say is that having all this, if I didn't say it before, sorry, is that he's been able to answer the questions that he'll continue to do so on Tuesday.
Yeah. Well said. And I do appreciate that candor and just matter of fact stance that you just made. Yeah. And so, Amy, I'm going to go to you and give you a chance to kind of give your statements on why, even in light of these allegations and the the media is like grabbing and running with it. And yet we see that, you guys are supporting Pete, and we want to know for our audience and for everyone out there why that is the case.
Well, thank you. I'll piggyback on what Teresa said. Pete seems to be sort of the underdog and the last likely person. It was kind of a nomination that surprised a lot of people. Surprised, but not surprised. And so I trust President-elect Trump to make a decision going on what he knows about Pete, his trust in him to execute his vision and his plan for leading the department. As far as the allegations go, Pete's been in the public spotlight, working in TV and being on the election campaign, a good-looking guy, a people person. People will sabotage and come out for you if you're not careful. And so I think he fell victim to some opportunistic women out there who took any chance they could to make some either, false allegations or being in a situation. But we are Pete. Pete is us. We know that no one is perfect. We don't want perfect. We don't want someone who's so overly polished you really can't trust. Are they a real person with real emotions and real feelings? And so that's why I feel so connected to Pete, because he is an underdog, and I feel sorry for him that people would go and make either false allegations, but I do appreciate that he can communicate. He's an expert communicator, and he took the opportunity immediately to address the allegations, came on with Megyn Kelly and very decisively, deliberately went through these allegations. And it was easy for me to understand. I felt, and we all on this panel here know, and we can see through liars and cheaters and fakes. And so I truly felt, and I didn't make any preconceived notion thoughts, but I truly felt he was being honest and that I could trust his word. And so in the world of a desert landscape for true leadership, I think he displayed the ultimate leadership by going and facing some of these allegations head on and explained it. And no one is perfect. We don't want perfect. We want someone who can learn from bad experiences, move on. He's 44 years old. He'll have a team surrounding some of the complexities, but he's an academic. He has the education. He has the experience of deployment, serving in uniform. And that's why I'm supporting him, because I truly feel that connection. And I know the troops do too, with his tats and his outgoing personality. I think it's something that people can relate to in terms of being proud to serve in the department, knowing that we are aligned. I'm aligned to his values and what he wants to do and his vision for leading the department.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, go ahead.
I just have one quick thing to add to what Amy said, because it hasn't been addressed. The other thing that people like to say about Pete is, oh, he doesn't have the experience. And I'm no historian, but I do know that there have been people with far less experience who have gone on to do the most amazing things in companies and in boardrooms and within the military. So when people say that to me, I go, let's see here. He was a major. He served in the military. He is a combat vet. And then people like to also criticize the way he ran those two nonprofits. And that was another reason why his interview with Megyn Kelly was so valuable. Because number one, every single person that talked about how he ran these nonprofits was strangely not named in the media. And that just really gave me pause. Like, why is it that the people who are saying that he did such a terrible job with these two veteran nonprofits are not willing to put their name in these articles? And really, to be honest with you, it also made me lose a lot of respect for the legacy media. The New Yorker and some of these major outlets just ran with anonymous sources. And if we're supposed to trust the media, well, then why are there anonymous sources? So that was another thing that really just didn't sit well with me and helped me make the decision that I did. So just wanted to add that very quickly.
Yeah, I'm going to point out a story just to piggyback off of what you were just saying, Teresa, of experience. There was I believe he was a major lieutenant colonel in 1941 that was looked at. He was a excellent logistics officer in the Army, executive officer of his unit at the time. And he was later promoted into a 5-star general by the end of the war. And that man's name was Dwight Eisenhower. The reason we won World War II was because of his logistical prowess. So good that the reason we have an interstate system is because of him. And for those of you that don't know, the interstate was actually created so that we could have military logistics, effective military logistics to get them across the country. In this, one of the reasons was for that in the case of a war. So don't think that just because they say somebody doesn't have any experience that they cannot do great things, because we have a great example in Eisenhower's history and career that it's about being the right person for the right time. I think Hegseth is actually the right person for this time. And that's my own personal opinion, but basically the way that the military is right now, I think we need somebody that's going to shake up and change the top echelon of the military that makes it more for the people throughout the ranks.
Yeah.
Chris, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Yeah, well said, John. And I'm going to skip right to the 10th question, because I think the questions before that, the ladies have all addressed those questions. Before we dive into that, just a quick anecdote with regards to the negativity. So, Jess, I'm sure you know where the Manchester Grand Hyatt is in San Diego. And I had the privilege of having lunch with Lou Holtz there in 2003, winningest coach NCAA football history. At the time, he was getting paid $150,000 per hour to speak at corporate events. And he had lunch with 12 of us from Sun Microsystems. And he said, I understand that y'all were told that Sun paid me $150,000 to come speak with you for 1 hour. And he said, I want to clear that up. Sun Microsystems did not pay me $150,000 to come speak with y'all for an hour. They paid me to fly here from the East Coast because I hate planes, and I'll stay and talk to you as long as you'll have me. He stayed for 4 hours. And we all walked out of this lunch meeting shell-shocked with the insight that he dropped on us. But he said something, sometimes somebody says something and it just sticks with you for life, something really simple. He said, there's two types of people in this world. There's those people who elevate themselves by elevating everybody around them, and those people who elevate themselves by putting other people down. And he said, the good news is you have a choice of which bucket you're in. So a lot of this negativity that's been spewed towards Pete Hegseth, I attribute to people putting themselves in that second bucket and trying to make themselves appear larger than life by putting him down. So with that being said, final question to everybody. And Mandy, when we come to you, I'd like you to speak towards the letter you wrote to the Senate. So the question is, what are the biggest threats and challenges that you foresee for our military at this point in time?
I would have to say it's going to be disintegration from the internal operations that are happening. And we saw this from the advent of COVID. We saw a mass extradition of all of the personnel who fought on that vaccine. And so the morale began to quickly decline because we were recognizing the glaring issues of contradictions that were happening. So it's not a matter of this external force that's trying to attack us on all fronts like we classically think of when it comes to the military. It's happening from the inside out. And so if we are disintegrating the morale and the patriotism from within, and this is something maybe I can speak on to, being heavily involved with social media, my God, the things that I see on Instagram, on TikTok about people in uniform glaringly discuss how much they dislike their service and how much they hate being in uniform and all of the negative things surrounding their time in the military. This is a constant discussion, and it's not based on anything that you feel is like they're not presenting problems with solutions. They're just presenting problems that kind of seem like a them issue. It's an attitude issue. And I think it has a lot to do with how, again, with the inclusion of DEI being a focus and the decrease of lethality, the focus of transgenders and inclusion for these people who have a mental health issue. We are advocating for things that do not support the warfighting organization. And then the people that really care about what we do are getting out. They're tired of it. They're exhausted. They're done with the bullshit, and they want to see some change that has not been happening. And if Pete Hegseth doesn't do that, there's going to be a lot more people who leave. And a continuation from the recruiting standpoint, 70 to 75% of people do not qualify to serve in the United States military. That doesn't include the individuals who don't want to serve in the military. So it becomes a smaller and smaller portion of people that are choosing not to support the defense of this nation. And with the turnover and the attrition of our current service members, it's going to become a crisis. So if we don't take care of this issue from the inside out, I can see it becoming a cancer and ultimately dying out, and which we can't afford.
I did not expect that answer, Jess. That's fairly disconcerting to say the least. We're pretty politically incorrect here on Survival Dispatch News. That actually my office in a former life was referred to as the Office of Politically Uncorrectness. And you made a comment with regards to transgender people. And I like pointing this particular thing out. Up until 2018, the World Health Organization classified transgenderism or body dysmorphia as a mental illness. It was taken off because of this agenda of asymmetric warfare, irregular warfare against us to divide and conquer us, to take it off that list and then make the rest of us participate in that mental illness. And I disagree with it vehemently in all aspects, not just the military. So I'll get off that soapbox. Teresa, I know you've got some strong feelings on Pete Hegseth, but in addition to that, what are the biggest challenges that our military faces going forward?
So the biggest challenges that our military faces is if we're going to stop funding forever wars. I mean, I really want to look at this as a bigger picture issue. Having served at NATO and had a wonderful experience there, don't get me wrong, to see how much the U.S. contributes to NATO and how much some of the other nations don't contribute their same share. And then to continue to see over and over again how much money we dump into Ukraine. And all this is going unchecked. Or how much money we give to the Taliban. I mean, let's all watch the Sean Ryan podcast about how much money is going to the Taliban to fund the terrorists that are actually going to come and one day kill us. When I see things like the Cybertruck bomber and the New Orleans January 1st incident, we are in a security pressure cooker right now. And this is why we need a military that's focused on the right things and focused on the right priorities. And right now, with DEI and transgender and some of these other initiatives, and always having these firsts and putting our focus on that instead of on what we should be doing, which is keeping our people safe. I'm concerned. And I'm also concerned that there were 2 veterans that were involved in the January 1st incident. Well, 1 active duty and 1 veteran. I'm concerned about that because that points to a whole nother issue, as Jessica said, where some of these problems are coming from within. And we don't teach our people responsible use of social media. We don't have open conversations and transparent discussions about the problems within our force. Sadly, even my own community has now put the institution over the Constitution. So ethically, we're not doing the things that are in our DoD principles of communications. And I want to get back to that because when I see some of these things, and again, these are wonderful people. I served with the best of the best in the public affairs community. Amy's a PAO, I'm a PAO. Jessica, you were in the public affairs community. But I want to see us get back to being transparent and being safe. We're not keeping people safe right now. And so I see those as the biggest issues, is prioritizing what are the things that we need to be looking at. And thankfully, not only is there going to be Pete in this new administration, but I'm really encouraged about Tulsi Gabbard and having her as the next director of, I think, naval intelligence. I really do believe she was the right pick for that. She's also a warfighter, civil affairs in the, I think it was Army. She's Army reservist. And that's just wonderful to see others stepping forward who have served and are going to be part of this new administration.
Well said, Teresa. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your insight, everybody for that matter. So, Mandy, same question to you. What are the biggest threats and challenges you foresee for our media? And would love to you to step us through the letter that you wrote to the Senate. So we can start wherever you want.
I'll start by just commenting where Teresa left off. I'm a big Tulsi Gabbard fan, and if she's listening, I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you. You know, Tulsi is from Hawaii, and obviously the red hot water crisis happened in Hawaii. And when it did, and when I became super outspoken, she got my email and she wrote me an email and said, "Mandy, heard about your advocacy. How can I help?" From her Gmail account. And I just, I think the world of her, and I could not be more grateful that people like her are going to serve under this next administration. She is the right leader, and she's the right type of leader that we need in this administration. But thank you for mentioning Tulsi. I had to comment. Anyways, I did write a letter, to ask on behalf of Pete. And I talked about, in the beginning when the red hot water crisis happened, we couldn't get anyone to tell the story. It was the biggest cover up since Camp Lejeune. It was the Camp Lejeune 2.0, and the way that it was handled and the way that it was covered up, the lies that families were told, the information that had, was being withheld from us, and quite honestly, still today. But Pete, I did an interview with Pete. It was one of my first national news interviews, and not only in that interview did he show his care, but he also continued to check back in with us and my attorney as well. Throughout the past 3 years. And he just, he showed so much care and compassion and showed that he truly understands the hardships of military families that the military families face today. And so, I'm really grateful for that. And that, that really resonated with me, and it will stick with me forever. I just want to read maybe just the last paragraph to sort of summarize. As a nation, we are at an inflection point where restoring trust, morale, and operational readiness within our armed forces is paramount. Mr. Hegseth's appointment would signal a decisive step in that direction. He's a leader who will prioritize the needs of our service members and their families, confront challenges head on, and uphold the values that define the strength and honor of our military institution. We as a force, we cannot be mission ready. We cannot be mission focused if our people are sick, if we're poisoning our own people, if we're not providing adequate housing to our families, if we're not taking care of our military families, if our service members can't even speak up and advocate for their own children without fear of retaliation or retribution. We have broken a lot of trust. I speak a lot on Red Hill, but through my own advocacy, I've been connected with several other communities, whether it be the honorable service members who, stuck close to their Christian beliefs and Christian values and asked for, a religious accommodation and were treated terribly because of, refusing the COVID vaccine. I've been in contact with, Burn Pit's community and all the work that, Hunter 7 is doing, and Burn Pitch 360 and everything in the toxic exposure space. And I just think that, in order for us to get back to who we were as a military, we need to prioritize. We need to put our money where our mouth is when we say people are our greatest asset. And I truly believe that Pete is the right person for that job and will uphold that motto.
Very well said, Mandy. Thank you. Amy, you get final word.
Well, I'll piggyback on all three of the previous comments, because one of the biggest things facing the military, and I'm still serving in the reserves, and as a public affairs officer, I have a front row seat to a lot of the crisis events that are happening, whether it's life or limb, and the investigations, and then the aftermath. So for example, going back several years, even to the McCain and the Fitzgerald ship collisions, the friendly fire incident with the Navy shooting down a pilot over seas, the Marine Corps, the Marines that were lost at sea when their AAV sank off the coast of Camp Pendleton. I mean, I could go on and on and on about failures where you're talking about life and limb, and it's chronic. So I'm not sure really if we had one thing to pinpoint, but it comes down to leadership, planning, executing. I think people are not necessarily paying attention, or they're ill-focused. And so it could lead back to a recruiting issue, and it could lead back to putting people in a leadership or responsible position who don't belong there because they haven't proven that they can actually care for others and lead and execute training events. And you think, okay, if you can't do this in a training environment, you surely can't do it in a combat environment or a crisis response environment. And so, and I'll even mention the Navy SEALs who fell into the water off the coast of Africa. And I read the report, and the accountability is slow to come. But just when you, at a tactical level, if we can not execute on some basic training evolutions, surely we can't handle the Red Hill issue or these other issues that the burn pits created for 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan. And so I feel like there's for those of us who've served long enough, more than 20 years, you start seeing patterns repeat themselves. And that's what's scary, is that the lessons learned and the after actions, that all goes into the trash because no one wants to listen because they think they know it all. And so there's some lessons to be learned about lessons learned. And so I hope going forward, as Teresa and I are moving closer towards retirement, is that we are committed to sharing those lessons with the next generation to set them up for success, because it's not just their career. Our national security is at stake. And so taxpayers expect us to execute properly and ethically and morally, and to a level of so that people can stay alive and come home to their families and not be killed on a training exercise. Is completely unacceptable. And I'm so passionate about it because we have to make the reports, and we have to write the stories and go to the memorials and answer for the families and answer questions to the media. And that's the hardest thing to do over and over and over again in training or in a combat environment. And so it's heartbreaking that that's just more of a common theme these days, and there's no explanation and there's no accountability. So I think that those are the challenges facing Pete Hegseth coming into his leadership role, but it's nothing that he can't handle. And I just want to say that I don't think we want perfect. I think we want someone who doesn't have all the answers, who doesn't have 40 years of experience in uniform, because I think when you get to that level, you get jaded, you get complacent, you get bored, you get tired, and you just want to say, I'm just sitting in the chair, but I don't really want to do the thing. And so we can see right through that. And so if you compare and contrast maybe, previous leadership roles, we say, you know what, we need someone with energy who has the momentum and has the trust of the president, and somebody that we can trust and look to say, we know you're going to make the right decision, or we support you because we know that you're in it not to make money, not to have a prestigious job, because he already had all of that. Mm-hmm. So he's doing it because he purely wants to. And that's why I support him. And I think if people look a lot closer and realize when you look around and say, who can do the job? It's a very short list of people who could be trusted to do that job. But I'm all in for Pete, and I'm so grateful to be able to share this podcast with your audience. I love all your chatters. NJ Prepper is in there chatting up, and I love this experience. So thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for your insight, Amy. Absolutely incredible answer. So usually we're wrapped up around the 2-hour point. So we're going to go to a quick message from Sawyer Products, one of our sponsors. And then when John and I come back, we're going to jump straight to chapter 3. But I'd like to thank all of you for participating tonight. You're all amazing women. Can't thank you enough, not just for your time, but for your service. And thank you.
Yeah, I would also like to echo that from Chris as a veteran and a brother to you sisters in arms. I can't say enough about strong women that are willing to stand up and let their voice be heard in situations like this, because it's needed. And appreciate all of your service and what you're doing in the world of the military, and just, you know, exposing and shedding light on all of this stuff. Really, really appreciate it. Teresa, I'm going to give a shout out to your podcast, SOS Podcast. It's on YouTube. All you guys go over there and subscribe. I can't wait to actually dig into it because I looked it up when I first saw that. So can't wait to watch some of that. But thank you, ladies, for everything you're doing.
All right. We'll be right back.
The Sawyer Mini is the most versatile personal filtration system available. It's a perfect solution for backpacking, hiking, hunting, fishing, scouting, international travel, and emergency preparedness. At a mere 2 ounces, the Mini fits in the palm of your hand and can filter up to 100,000 gallons of water from any freshwater lake, river, or stream. The Sawyer Mini has a 0.1 micron absolute pore size. It was tested to 10 million parts of bacteria and 1 million parts of protozoa without a single breakthrough. This is the highest level filters can be tested to, so we're confident these are the highest rates of filtration available.
All right, John and I are back. So we had a lot of content teed up for chapter 2. We'll push that into tomorrow evening's episode, but we'll jump right into chapter number 3. I see we've still got Teresa and Amy in the background. If y'all can hear me, you're welcome to join us. Just give me a wave and you can come on back on stage with us if you want. 100% your call. First thing to bring up is, I don't know if you caught it or not, John, but we had Michael Letts and JJ Carroll on again last night. And we discussed Tom Homan's mass deportation efforts. And Tom Homan says the administration is considering setting up a hotline to allow Americans to report illegal migrants suspected of committing crimes. It's a rather interesting option. I've also heard people suggest that they're going to pay a bounty for that. What do you think of that? $1,000 for every bad guy that you turn in is what they're saying.
This is where my I think overall the intention of it's good. I always get leery of things that are encouraging people to turn in, you know, neighbors. But in this case, it's, you know, you're not talking about necessarily neighbors. You're talking about people that broke the law. If you know beyond a shadow of a doubt, and it actually turns out that it is, I don't really have an issue with it. But my libertarian conservative spidey sense goes crazy when I see, you know, hey, we're going to offer money for people to turn other people in. You know, if that was at some point turned against, you know, us as Americans because, you know, we believe in free speech or gun rights or anything like that, that's when I start having a problem with it. But I think in this case, it's not a terrible idea.
Yeah. I mean, philosophical question. Do the people who are here illegally have the same constitutional rights as those of us who are American?
No. And that's, yeah, so that would be the cutoff point. If you're doing that for, you know, like give an example during COVID, turning people in for opening their business up or not having people mask indoors in their business and that kind of stuff, that's a different situation because then you're taking away the rights of American citizens. So that is probably the best dividing line. So yeah, that's a good distinction for that, is that, you know, they broke the law. They're not actually citizens of this country. And yeah, so that would be the dividing line for me, for sure.
Yeah, I'm in complete agreement with you there, John. So moving on to the debacle with these fires in Southern California, I mentioned last night some of the officials and what their pay rates were. And I mentioned this girl who was getting $750,000 a year, but I didn't have a link queued up for it last night, but I do tonight. But because we're running long, I'm not going to play the video. For everybody who wants to watch this video, just go to patreon.com/survivaldispatch, sign up, for a free membership, and you can download the situation report, which is the brief we use for each episode, and all the links are in that. So I'll just read through this a little quickly. LA's $750,000 a year water chief, who allegedly oversaw emptying of the Santa Ynez Reservoir, previously said the number one thing she cared about in her role was equity. No wonder why LA is burning. Every leader is a DEI hire. And I don't know about you, John, but this is a striking difference compared to the women that we just had on versus the debacle in Southern California. I mean, it couldn't be, you know, more black and white as far as I'm concerned. I will say that in this video, and I don't know if you had a chance to watch it, John, but she picks apart everything you can possibly imagine and says this has to be looked at through a lens of equity. And essentially, this is what I've been bemoaning for quite some time. Equality of opportunity does not equate to equality of outcome. And when you force that, what's it called? Oh, that's right, communism. So about as anti-American as it gets.
This is, as you start to peel back the layers of this disastrous onion, it becomes just so infuriating. But also, a lot of people voted these people in California, and that's really where I have the utmost sympathy for the people that are losing their homes, losing their livelihoods, losing all of that stuff. But it's also infuriating to know that, these people were elected that have been so incompetent. They've been being told for decades that this is a problem. There's a clip that's been going around from Joe Rogan about this fire expert that was saying, yeah, we've just been lucky. The right wind and the right fire is going to engulf the entirety of LA because we don't have the resources for it.
Right.
Like this, and yet you're paying $750,000 a year, almost double what the president makes, 3 times what the governor of California, 3 times what the mayor of LA makes to do this bad of a job. That should be infuriating to everyone.
Absolutely.
Nobody's worth that amount of money to be this incompetent.
It's insane. So I just want to make it really, really clear that you and I both genuinely respect and appreciate the women who are on tonight. I mean, all of them are incredibly intelligent and articulate, and they've done amazing things for the country. But they've all got there on merit. They didn't get there. You can tell nothing was handed to them just because they were women. They're incredibly competent, intelligent women. So I had to say that because I fully expect somebody to point out the irony of this next image, but I don't really care. Is it too soon?
I think, excuse me, I think one of the craziest, I don't know if you played this video in the last couple of days of this DEI hire firefighter. That's basically is like, well, if they're asking, well, could she carry my husband out of my house if it was on fire? And she makes this comment of like, well, if your husband's in a place where I have to carry him out, he's in the wrong place, or basically implying that like I'm not going to do my job and it's your fault if I have to go in and pull you out of fire. And I'm like, that's not the outlook that I got from any of the ladies that were on this podcast tonight, or any of the, I know female firefighters in my local area,
right? And
they fight as hard as any male to meet the standards, to do all of that stuff. Like if you have a good fire department, there is a standard that they have to meet to be a firefighter. 100%. And some men don't make that standard. I know guys that have failed because they're not strong enough to carry a hose up multiple flights of stairs. There is a standard. What is very apparent in what happened in LA is that the standards were lowered and they made hiring decisions. There was a very well-known comedian, Adam Carolla. If you guys don't know who Adam Carolla is a very unique guy in that he's been a celebrity for a long time, but he's worked regular jobs a good chunk of his life. He actually applied for the Los Angeles Fire Department. They put him on a waiting list, and it took 7 years for him to get called back. You know why? He was a white male.
Yep.
White male. When he was standing in line, he said there was a woman behind him, a black lady that was behind him, and he turned around and he said, "So how long have you been waiting to get on the list?" She's like, "I just applied Wednesday." And it was Friday. So we're not, that's opposite of a meritocracy, guys. That's what we're talking about. That is the broken system, is that if you are hiring people based off of, their characteristics as opposed to their merit, then you're missing the point and you're doing wrong. And this is the result: gross incompetence.
So high-tech industry is rotten to the core when it comes to this stuff. And a couple years back, a very proficient programmer who had worked for Google submitted his resume to DuckDuckGo and didn't get a call, nothing. And he thought to himself, you know, I wonder if they're not responding because I'm a white male. So he redid his resume and turned himself into a black female and sent it in. And in less than a day, not only got a response, was asked how quickly he could start. And then he blew the whole thing out there. And, you know, DuckDuckGo did all sorts of, you know, backflips to try and say how it had nothing to do with it. You know, his original resume must have fallen through the cracks, but we all know that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
So,
well,
and another, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say another quick anecdote is I got called out years ago for everybody on my team being Caucasian. And I just so happened to have a stack of resumes on my desk that, I kid you not, was 6 inches thick. And I said to them, I said, because there was 2 of them in my office, I said, have you got 5 minutes? And they said, yeah, why? I said, well, just give me 5 minutes to go through this stack of resumes. So I went through the entire stack and I had 3 resumes. And I said, these 3 here get interviews. The rest of them don't get a call back. And they said, there's no way you could go through a stack of resumes that fast and decide who to hire. And I said, I didn't decide who to hire. I decided who not to hire. Right. We're a technology company. And every single one of these resumes that I elected not to grant an interview to had spelling mistakes. So we're a high tech company, and I'm in sales, business development, and you want me to hire people who can't even use spell check on their own resumes? Not going to happen.
Right.
End of story. Yep. I don't care if the 3 are purple, green, yellow, whatever. When you're compensated based on your team's performance in sales, it really doesn't matter what they look like, where they come from. Is it the best person for the job or not? It's all that matters. So,
yep.
Anyway,
that's 100%. Yeah. I was actually going to talk about this too, real quick. There's been some speculation on these insurance cancellations and stuff of the fire insurance and stuff. And I know that generally my thought is to go to, you know, well, they canceled it because of some giant conspiracy. No, the reality is they probably canceled it. And there's actually documentation specifically for State Farm that they said there were unsafe conditions for the fires. Like they saw that there had not been proper maintenance of the forest and all of this stuff surrounding this area. And so they said, you guys realize that insurance is a calculated risk. That's how they make money. Insurance would not exist if they had to pay out for everything all of the time. It is a calculated risk. Unfortunately, when your insurance premiums go up, it's not always because of you. It may be because, like, health insurance is a perfect example. Obamacare issues not withstanding, if a bunch of people are taking their kid for the sniffles to the emergency room and racking up massive debts of testing and all this stuff, guess what? That giant pool, if a bunch of people are doing it and you're not doing it, it still is going to raise the cost of your insurance because it's a calculated risk. Property
insurance is determined by zip code across the entire country.
Yep. And so they have teams that go out and assess the areas. Like if you're in a flood zone, you're going to pay a massive amount extra for insurance. If you're, this in Florida, you have to have some level of hurricane insurance. That is just a fact of how insurance works. And so the reason that these people were all canceled, it sucks. It's horrible, was because it was a governmental problem. They weren't actually taking care of the things that they are supposed to take care of. And so the people paid the price.
Absolutely. 100%. And there's no love lost between me and insurance companies, but you're 100% on the right track here, that they looked at it and said, this is terrible. There's an opportunity for massive fires. Peace out. We're done. State Farm were the biggest ones who did that, by the way, in California. State Farm stopped insuring homes here in Florida after Hurricane Matthew for the same reason. They were like, we get smoked every time this happens, and they bailed out. But anyway, moving on from there. Next one up. Just imagine if we would have dedicated even a couple billion towards the fire department instead of giving $500 billion away to Ukraine. I mean, talk about self-inflicted. And I don't know if I have a certain tab or article open. It might have been in chapter 2. If so, I'll put it into tomorrow's brief. But not only was the 17.6 million cut, the mayor demanded last week, the week before last, just before she went to Ghana, she wanted another $40 million in cuts for the upcoming fiscal year. So almost $60 million in cuts. And if you haven't seen the stuff with her, did you see the video, John, of her being asked questions by the reporter and she just standing there like a deer caught in the headlights?
Mm-hmm.
Well, did you see after she left, that was in the jetway, right? That was when she just gotten off a plane. Did you see her a couple hours later in her first public statement on the fires? She said, and if any of you need assistance, go to URL.
Yes. I mean,
it's the school of Joe Biden. Right now.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of like, repeat the line.
Just unfrickin' believable. All right, next one up here. Unbelievable. Firefighters and fire trucks. This is brutal. From neighboring states heading to California to assist with fires must first stop in Sacramento for an inspection before providing any aid. What it doesn't say in the written part, hopefully it does when I play the video. I can't remember. I've watched so many of them. Do you know what the inspection's for, John? They have to meet California emission standards.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So if one of these trucks coming from out of state like Oregon doesn't pass California's ridiculous emission standards, sorry, we're just going to let everything burn down. You have to leave. It's insanity.
Yeah, and that's that. I think I sent you guys a screenshot that I was on my phone looking at generators the other night, and there was one, and it literally says there 49 states, California, and you have to buy a different generator if you live in California because of emissions. It's not as efficient, and because of all the emission stuff, it puts more wear on the engine long term that's going to run that generator. It's insane, and like, I mean, everything is over. Like, the bureaucracy in California is beyond the pale as far as if you compare it to any other state, any other blue state too. And I live in a blue state, but I mean, it is insane the level of bureaucracy and red tape that you have to go through in California.
I couldn't agree more. Let's hear what this guy's got to say.
California called for help. They said to some of their neighboring states like Nevada and Idaho and Oregon and Washington, send us some fire rigs, send us some firefighters. We've got to get these fires out. Guess what happened? Did all those fire rigs and personnel go straight to the fire lines? No, they did not. They went to Sacramento. And why? Because California says if you send us your fire rig, it must first go to Sacramento for an inspection by Cal Fire. And only if it passes the inspection, and apparently it's taking some time, some of the crews have been held up, only then does it go to Pacific Palisades and start fighting those fires in Los Angeles. That's how crazy it is. And to make it even worse, on the way out of the state, after all those fire crews and rigs are done, they have to stop in Sacramento for a second inspection on their way out of state.
Just in complete insanity. All right. While everyone concentrates on Los Angeles, let's not forget Western North Carolina. You know, JD Vance was in North Carolina, East Tennessee before the election and said that he hoped that they would get the appropriate aid that they need before him and Trump would hopefully be inaugurated. Then, of course, they won the election. I sure hope that they come through on that, because what's been going on from Hurricane Helene is not acceptable. We can't help these people, but we can send billions overseas to everybody else. It's, again, we're back to our government. This particular installed administration is under the direct control of our enemies. No other way to square it. All right, let's inject some humor. Go ahead if you got something to say on that, though, John.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say this is just another example. Do you know what would have happened if this would have happened in your state, Chris, with your governor? What would have happened if Ron DeSantis would have been actually had to deal with this problem?
Oh, we would have mobilized, and there would be no more fires at this point in time.
Yep. Well, first of all, Ron DeSantis would have actually taken care of the forest.
Well, let me give you a really good example, though, John. When we have a hurricane and our power gets knocked out, there are linesmen who don't just come from across America, but they come from Canada as well to volunteer their time and expertise to help Floridians get their power back up and running. That is all a direct result of outreach programs that Ron DeSantis' administration have done for years, and administrations before him. It didn't just start with him, but you don't kick a gift horse in the mouth, and it's not complicated.
No. And it's leadership. It's that's what real leadership looks like. That's also why Ron DeSantis like freaking owned him in the debate. Remember, he debated Gavin Newsom and basically just destroyed, in my opinion, probably destroyed him being the actual person that replaced Joe Biden, because he basically opened up every avenue of attack that you can destroy Gavin Newsom nationally on. I also wanted to say this. I don't know if you actually covered this yesterday or the day before. The Biden administration has already said that the U.S. government is going to foot the bill for everything lost in California.
That.
Where the heck was that for North Carolina? They get $750, guys. $750. You know how expensive a home is to replace in California, especially one that wasn't insured for fires. We're going to pay millions for a 1,100 square foot house like that. I'm not joking about that.
Nope,
like that is, and that's directly out of our pocket. And so what's the difference between North Carolina, where people lost generational homes, and what happened in California?
The Democrats,
that's your government.
Republicans.
Right. Yep.
Party politics bullshit.
Oh, and it was a loan. It wasn't even $750 or $20 that was given to you. You actually have to pay it back.
So they did change that, by the way. Initially it was going to be a loan, and then they got so much pressure they said that it would not be repayable. But it's still a slap in the face. It's an absolute joke. So anyway, this meme that's up there right now, of course, is Trump after the bullshit sentencing by Judge Merchan. I don't know if you caught his comments at all. So he said something along the lines of, the law only gave me this one option, blah, blah, blah. And sir, I wish you the best of luck in your second term as president. Like, bullshit, absolute bullshit. The whole thing is absolute bullshit. But anyways, moving on from there. Why do liberals demand gun control after every shooting, but never border control after every rape or murder by illegals? Because liberals don't breed, and they know that if they don't import millions of foreigners from third world shithole countries and give them away stuff for free, they won't have anybody to vote for them. It's all just about that. Nothing. JJ Carroll did some projections on these illegals and where they're going to across the country. Of course, they go to Democrat shitholes. That based on the projections for the 2030 census, that it would swing 60 seats in the House of Representatives from red areas to blue areas. I mean, it's a big deal. All right, next one up. I cannot unsee this now. So apropos, Beavis and Butthead for you right there, huh?
That is like uncanny, man. Even the nose.
So, question for you: does art imitate life, or does life imitate art? Cindy and I ask that question on a regular basis. Next one up, some wise words from Edward Snowden. When exposing a crime is treated as committing a crime, you are being ruled by criminals.
100%.
This is true. All right. Man, I think this was supposed to be a video, but it ended up a screenshot. So anyway, there's
that's a great video, by the way.
There's still enough to get a laugh out of it, though, right? So she says liberal men love conservative women. The very first comment, correction, liberal men prefer other liberal men.
Absolutely.
And here you go. Tragedy strikes twice for BLM founder Patrisse Cullors as 2 of her 3 Los Angeles mansions are consumed by wildfires. Imagine that.
Guess she's going to have to get a bunch of race riots going again so she can make a bunch of money again.
Well, and here you go. When white people are minorities in the democratic system, There's no special minority status, no affirmative action, etc. Quite the opposite. They will say the open anti-white policies are the will of the majority and the tables have turned. People don't know what they're in for. If you want to know what you're in for, if and when this happens, is just check out what's been going on in South Africa. It's you want to talk beyond the pale. And here you go. Leaked memo reveals LA Mayor Karen Bass demanded her fire department cut an extra $49 million just 1 week before the wildfires broke out. I thought it was $40 million, $49 million. Incomprehensible. Next one up.
Especially when you actually consider the history of fires in California. It happens all the time. Like,
that's from the Department of No Shit, Sherlock.
Yeah.
You know, we live in an age where you can build an entire culture around anal sex and venereal disease and then parade the streets with giant dildos and call it pride. But say you're proud to come from a people that gave the world Aristotle, Shakespeare, and Beethoven, and you're called a monster.
Let's not even, and not even to go into, you know, the massive scientific breakthroughs as well came from Anglo-Saxon Protestant Christians. Like it's undeniable.
And I just want to address this on Kendrick Williams' part. 17.6 million was cut from the fire department budget. The one that we just had up is adding another 49 million on top of the 17.6 million, just to be clear on that. All right, next one up. And there it is, the race card. It's 2025. That shit is over. No one cares. Resign, you incompetent lump of dog shit. LA Mayor Karen Bass is now claiming people don't like her and want her to resign because she's a black woman. No, you just say it.
Who elected her? Who elected her?
Right.
The same people that are mad at her. You know why they're mad? Because you screwed up so bad.
No shit. So
it's nothing to do with your skin color or your gender, numbskulls.
Yeah. So do you remember Joe Biden saying when he was running for election 2020, he was going to cure cancer? Dear Joe Biden, you have 10 days to go to cure cancer. How about looking into ivermectin and fenbendazole? Thank me later.
Did you watch the section with Joe Rogan and Mel Gibson where he talked about how many friends have been cured by that? And the thing that you talked about with me and that Todd Callender's used.
Yes. He got the name wrong. He said something else, but it's chlorine dioxide.
Yeah. I think he said I forget what exactly he said, but I was like, yeah, that's and that's not known. The reason that that's not used widespread is because they can't make any money off of it.
Yeah. So I see one of our very loyal followers is active in one of the chats right now. I've got all of them up on my screens here, who Todd Callender sent him that product, and he had cancer, he had kidney cancer, and it cured it. So, I mean, again, the plural of anecdote is not data, but there's a lot to be said for. All right. Moving on from there. Just in, breaking reported at U.S. Army Reserve Center in Tustin, California, 3 Humvees, machine gun vehicle mounts, and other equipment has been stolen. Wonder who took that. I have some guesses. New York Times, January 11th, 2025. That is today. Cases of a respiratory virus known as HMPV are climbing in China, evoking dark echoes of the start of the COVID-19 pandemic. But this situation is very different, medical experts say.
We're not going to fall for your bull crap this time.
Yeah. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And what did W say? George W. Bush. He completely fucked that whole adage up. And I can't remember what it was, but it was funny as hell.
Fool me once, my fault. Fool me twice, your fault. We won't get fooled again. It's almost verbatim what he said. It's like, oh, that guy.
Dumb as a fucking stump at the end of the day. All right, James Woods. Clients of our friend were trying to lease a house While their home was being renovated, the lease was for $18,000 per month. They were to sign the papers the day of the fire. Now the people renting want $30,000. The vultures are circling and the flames aren't even out yet. Greedy, greedy. All right. Gross mismanagement. Petition for urgent recall of LA's Democrat Mayor Karen Bass hits 59,150 signatures. That was earlier today. I would be willing to bet that it is much higher than that. All right, next one up. And John, I can't remember if you were with me or not. I had the pleasure of meeting my friend, Wayne Brown. So Wayne is the guy who owns Aggressor Adventures. And basically he just published a book, and it's called From Rags to Enrichment. And he over $100 million sale of all of his restaurants. He's basically retired. The guy who owns Aggressor was fixing to retire. He reached out to Wayne, said, "You want to buy it?" Wayne bought it. And now this is an amazing company. He's got over 24 yachts around the world that do these really interesting excursions. And I was talking to him, and they've got this one in Egypt where you go down the Nile River. His yachts on average sleep 10 couples, 20 people plus the crew, right? So they can get into ports that the big boats can't get into. 1 week, 5-star white collar service, all food, drinks, everything on the yacht, down the Nile, $2,500 for a couple, not each, $2,500 for a couple. And I said, "How on earth do you do that?" And he says, "We price all of our excursions based on local currency and what people local can afford. So when there's a big delta between our currency and Egypt's, you end up with that. Now, granted, it costs a lot of money to fly to Egypt, but what an incredible value." But I just got this in the mail from him. He's such a great guy. So this one is a collector's edition, as you can see on the camera there. But Wayne, very nice. He signed it. Chris, thank you for all you are doing for our great country, Wayne. So this was a really nice surprise that arrived in the mail today, and I can't thank Wayne enough for it. And if you're interested in some really interesting or having a great vacation, check out aggressoradventures.com. So that is it for chapter 3. Moving on from there, homework wise. So what can our audience do in light of the main topic tonight, which of course was Pete Hegseth? And so the recommendations are similar to the ones we've given in the past. So write to your congressional rep and senators, letting them know that you want Pete Hegseth confirmed. And if they vote against them, that you'll work with another candidate to primary them. If you download the brief for tonight, there's a link to govtrack.us, has all the contact information for all 535 Congress critters. Number 2, publicly support Pete Hegseth on your socials. Number 3, repost media that supports Hegseth, including Survival Dispatch News. And 4th, speak out against the woke BS that's infiltrated our military, thanks to garbage leadership like Mark Milley. And that's it for the 4 on my part. John, is there anything you'd like to add to that as far as what people can do between now and the 14th, only 3 days away?
Yeah, I mean, applying pressure. I think that really the winds of the political world have shifted. And I said that earlier off camera, that I think it's worldwide. I think that you're seeing a major shift towards the right and towards nationalism
Populism
versus globalism. Yeah.
Populism, nationalism. Yep.
Yeah. It's a massive shift worldwide. And I think that this is going to continue as we see success with this agenda coming in. But what we can do about this is inform other people, get 2 or 3 people to call into their congressman as well, apply pressure, just like we did with voting.
Yeah.
You know, inform some people. We have a few days, have some conversations around some dinner tables, and, you know, let people know, you know, we need to let our voices be heard. And this man is honorable. He has served with distinction. The guy has 2 Bronze Stars. I don't know if you guys understand what that means. You have to do some, you know, you have to do some things, some honorable things in combat to get Bronze Stars. It's not something they just hand out. And right. So he has served with distinction. He has served with honor. And he's going to lead. His worldview is exactly what we need leading our military.
I couldn't agree more. He's exactly one of you said it. I can't remember if it was you or one of the ladies, but this is the right time for somebody like Pete Hegseth. We need somebody of his, I don't know what you want to call it, of his type at this point in time. So in the home stretch here, quick reminder, patreon.com/survival dispatch. If you sign up for a free account, you get it 50% of our briefs for free. And if you're a paying member, you get all of them. So our briefs could be anywhere from 20 to 70 pages long every single day. The entire team at Survival Dispatch, there's 19 people who work on it on a regular basis, read millions of words of news all the way from MSNBC to Alex Jones and everything in between. And we put together what our research tells us is the truth. So it's, even if you don't hang with us for the videos, it's a curated daily newspaper, for lack of a better term, and it's only going to continue to get more and more polished. We've got a new section for restricted stuff that we can't put on most social media. We've got partner deals. You get our Essentials Guide for free. If you had nothing else but the Essentials Guide, you could survive an SHTF situation. You get access to our private encrypted chat on Signal. I can't even begin to describe the volume of intel, information sharing, and camaraderie that occurs on that channel. It's amazing. Process is you sign up, send an email to support@survivaldispatch.com. After you've downloaded and installed Signal, send us your phone number. We'll send you an invite and you can join the crew in there. It's just incredible how it took off.
Yeah, it's incredible. And I'll tell you this, it's all hours of the day that we're gathering news. I mean, how many times have I texted you at midnight a news story, Chris? And you're already asleep right now.
How many times have I texted you guys at 3-4 o'clock in the morning and you and Dave both respond? Yeah.
We're night owls, or we're people that don't use sleep. So yeah, it's really we do a lot of hard work to get this news to you guys, working behind the scenes and then presenting it to you. So it's well worth the volume or the value that you get. And but real quick, I'm going to give us a little shout out. Our training schedule for 2025 is absolutely done, and it's on our website. Awesome. So if you guys are looking for training, we have several trainings each month starting in March. So get on righteoussavages.com, go to the class page, and they're all there. And our online stuff is progressing, so that should be out within the next month. So, yep.
Awesome. Yeah, and I mean, a whole bunch of us are going to be at SHOT Show week after next, and there's going to be all kinds of really cool content coming from there. John and I've got a long list of A-list people in the firearms industry teed up. It's going to be an amazing experience for everybody. So, John, we're kind of running low on conflicted questions. We got 14 decks from them. Very nice of them. We've run through most of them. So I've been going to Grok and saying, which is Elon's AI, and saying, what's a good question to ask a prepper that I haven't already asked you for, or something like that. So it spits something out different. So today, what Grok spit out for the prepper Q&A is, how do you balance the need for preparedness with the risk of over preparing or becoming too paranoid? And I'll take a quick run at this first, because I've been saying for several years now, if you take the low numbers for food inflation, let me actually just back up for a second here. Core inflation rate is a bullshit number from our federal government. Both parties have used it. And the reason it's bullshit is because it doesn't include food, fuel, and housing costs, the three things that decimate American paychecks. Okay. The next part to it is you have to go to the CPI, which is the Consumer Price Index, which does kind of include those things. But if something skews the numbers too high, and the administration that's in power at the time doesn't want you to know that, they start selectively taking things out. For example, coffee jumped by 29% in wholesale price in 1 month last summer. They took it out of the CPI so they could feed you more bullshit numbers. So on the low end, since shit for brains Biden's been installed in office, food inflation's been 21% year over year. If you take the high number, it's 41% year over year. So if you just go right to the middle, 31% year over year, what I've been telling people is, if you have a little extra disposable income, buy some foods with a long shelf life, freeze-dried foods, canned goods, those sort of things. And whether or not the sky falls or not, you're going to eat that food eventually. So tell me what else you can put your money into and get 31% compounded year-over-year return on. Not there's nothing. Okay. So it's not, you're not risking being over prepped or paranoid by putting money away for that stuff. The same goes for ammunition, guns, consumable, things like that. You know what? Shooting's a perishable skill. Nobody knows that better than you, John. Yep. So you buy ammo when you can. You shoot as much of it as you possibly can under training circumstances. And again, you're not being too paranoid because, I'll use my situation as an example, John. Everybody, when we're young, thinks bad shit only happens to other people, right? So when I was in that first wreck that destroyed my vision, I kept thinking to myself, how the heck could this happen to me? Sort of thing. And I've since then come to realize, and that's 30 years ago, by the way, come to realize that bad stuff happens to good people every day. And if you think that there's 0% chance of you getting in a wreck, being assaulted, being robbed at a gas station, having a home invasion, you're fooling yourself. This stuff happens day in, day out, and it's got nothing to do with being paranoid. It's about being prepared. So, hey, John, there was a company, I'm trying to remember what their name is. I think it was DOORICADE, DOORICADE, okay? And we get sent stuff all the time without soliciting it. People say, hey, could you check this out? Maybe put it on your channel. So it's these aluminum bars that go behind your door, right? And they didn't pay us or anything like that. I put it into a 60-second short, threw it up on YouTube, and immediately there are people saying, oh, that's not going to help you at all. People will just reach inside after they smash the side light out and blah, 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 blah. Well, number one, they wouldn't know it was there. Okay. Number two, there are lock tabs on it that these people didn't even pay attention to the video. So even if they did know it was there, now they got to fumble around through broken glass to find the stuff to remove it. So at the end of the day, can they get through the front door? We've got a decorative steel outswing door. Looks like a screen door, but it's steel, okay? Then behind that, we've got a man door where we've taken out all the screws and the hinges, put 3.5-inch screws back into the jack studs, plus a deadbolt, plus the door arcade behind it, right? So can somebody get through that door if they want to? Absolutely. I mean, we have guys in the military who do nothing but breach. They are capable of getting through any door, period. But what it is about is slowing people down so you have enough time to react, right? So these people who think that they're going to have a home invasion, wake up in the middle of the night, the bad guy's completely alert. You're going to wake up, grab a pistol off your nightstand and get a shot on target. Good luck with that. Seriously, good luck with that.
The only way to mimic that is to get your heart rate up to 160 beats a minute, 180 beats a minute, and then try and shoot.
Stress it off.
You're going to have a eye-opening come to Jesus moment if you get to that level, because go do some sprints or some burpees and then try and hit a target at 20 yards. It'll blow your mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, whether somebody's dry fire training with like a Mantis X, Blackbeard X, whether they're live fire training or using training rifles with, airsoft type projectiles and stuff like that, as soon as you elevate the heart rate, if you don't do this on a regular basis, your accuracy's terrible. John, have I shown the video while you've been on with me of the construction worker whose F-350 gets carjacked? So okay. So basically though, what happened is the carjacker is in the truck. The door to the truck is open. The construction guy is 6 feet away from him, pulls his pistol, shoots 6 times and misses the bad guy from 6 feet away. And the truck's not even moving, by the way, but obviously stress level off the chain. The bad guy puts it in reverse, backs up about 50 yards, mashes the throttle, runs the construction worker over and kills him. And that's a prime example of people not being able to shoot accurately under stress. So here's the thing is there's another level, and this, but I just want to share it with everybody else. okay, so you go out and you train, you elevate your heart rate, which I do 5 days a week sort of thing, run, shoot, do an exercise, run, shoot, do that nonstop, high intensity, 45 minutes. But here's the next thing. Try and shoot while you're moving with an elevated heart rate and see what happens. Now, I'm fortunate that I'm surrounded by highly, proficient people like yourself that train people. Carl Cottle said to me, he said, send me some video. So I sent him some video and he said, your feet are too high off the ground. He said, when you're shooting and moving like that, you need to almost slide your feet across the ground. Mm-hmm. And what was interesting about that, John, is shortly after he showed me that, and I was measuring stuff with the Mantis because I wanted to see, I didn't want to just hear the silhouette ring. I wanted to see numbers, right? So as my numbers were improving, we had a range day scheduled. We had Elvis Ray, Pilgrim James, Eric from U.S. Arms Company, and we were shooting some pretty high-end guns. And I handed one of them to Pilgrim James. Well, Pilgrim James is a veteran and a private contractor who did multiple deployments to Africa and the Middle East. And I'm filming him and I watched him. And it's the first time that I was really paying attention that he literally just glided across the ground. This was live fire training, small silhouette, by the way, and he connected on every single shot. And ever since then, every time I train, I finish with 2 series of on the run. I don't take a stationary stop at all. So anyway, we way off the garden path here. What's your advice, John, for how do people balance the need for preparedness with the risk of over prepping or becoming too paranoid?
Well, I think I'm kind of in the same boat with you as I don't think that, man, it's hard to say. And I'm not talking about the people that buy bomb shelters and, do all that stuff, but just generally, having a certain amount of food, having a certain amount of, as you said, honestly, one of the best investments for appreciation and value is guns, because as time goes on, they don't really lose a whole lot of value. They'll have a certain amount of depreciation. It's actually a good investment, whether it's a financial investment, a long-term investment, a self-defense investment. Buying that stuff and having it on hand is really important. And it's just generally being ready. Back 60 years ago, 70 years ago, everybody had a pantry in their home with food that they had canned because they grew up the children of a generation that went through a Great Depression. And so it wasn't, you didn't rely on going to the grocery store. You cooked out of your pantry. You killed your own food. You did all of that stuff. That is a part of preparedness. We've gotten away from that in the modern age because everything is so convenient. So it's really just getting back to an older style of living that is self-reliant. I don't think anybody doing that is paranoid, and I don't think that's paranoid thinking. Balancing that, I would say don't dwell on it all of the time, but don't ignore it either. Like, you don't have to spend 24/7 thinking about having the perfect preps. But I don't think you should spend 365 days of the year not thinking about it. I think you should think about it on a regular basis, semi-regular basis. What can I do in this grocery store run? Should I buy an extra bag of rice and put it in an airtight container? Should I can this food? Should I have this stuff on hand just in case? Should I have a generator in case the power goes out? I mean, yeah, you probably should. It's not being paranoid. It's being prepared, and it's being smart. So, yeah.
I couldn't agree more. So let me see here. We've got an closing video. It's 1 minute and 46 seconds long. This is a good one, John. I don't know if you had a chance to watch it or not, but we try to play a cool video at the end of each of our podcasts. The one we played last night was a repeat, The Sound of Violence. I get emails every single time we play that. People say, man, that was awesome. This one is not the same as The Sound of Violence, but it's pretty decent. 1 minute and 46 seconds. Please like, share, comment, subscribe, and God bless America.